Section 1. The world Bethesda built. Picture the year 2077. Somewhere in a gleaming suburb of Boston, a man in a military uniform steps out onto the porch of his home and watches the sky. The leaves on the maples are turning gold and amber. His son is playing in the yard. His wife is inside. There is a strange amber light coming from the horizon, not the sun, which set hours ago. The light grows. The ground begins to shake. He grabs his son, runs to the door of Vault 111, and the world ends behind him. 210 years later, that man wakes up in a cryopod. That is the Fallout universe in one breath. It is a world of extraordinary contrast, suburban kitchens preserved under dust and radiation, vintage cars rusting in city intersections, neon signs flickering over collapsed hotels. It is America frozen at a retro-futurist 1950s ideal, and then shattered, irradiated, and left to grow strange and beautiful in the ruins. It is one of the richest game universes ever constructed. And the reason for that richness is not always the mainline story quests or the factions or the companions. It is the details. The things you find when you walk away from the main quest marker and just wander. Bethesda and the various studios that shaped the Fallout universe over the decades have always known that their greatest storytelling tool is the environment itself. A skeleton slumped against a wall, a holotape tucked inside a desk drawer, a note on a refrigerator in a ruined house. These are the places where the real Fallout lives. They are the Easter eggs and hidden details that reward the player who is willing to slow down, look around, and wonder. And there are thousands of them, scattered across 6 mainline games, dozens of DLC expansions, and a television adaptation that has lovingly encoded decades of lore into its frames. The secrets of Fallout could fill a library. This is not a library. This is something quieter than that. This is 3 hours of settling in and letting those secrets wash over you, one by one, like the static between radio stations on a Pip-Boy. The Fallout series began in 1997 with a game developed by Black Isle Studios and published by Interplay. That original Fallout was a top-down isometric RPG set in the ruins of California, and it was for its time an extraordinarily ambitious piece of storytelling. It placed you in the role of a vault dweller, sent out from the relative safety of an underground shelter to find a replacement water chip before your entire community died of thirst. What it did around that simple premise was remarkable. It built a world saturated with dark humor, philosophical questions about the nature of civilization, and environmental details so carefully crafted that players were still finding them years after release. The team at Black Isle Studios, led by figures like Fergus Urquhart, and featuring writers who would go on to shape some of the most celebrated RPGs in gaming history, loved hiding things. They loved leaving signatures. They loved making the wasteland feel inhabited by real people who had real lives before the bombs fell. That tradition carried through Fallout 2 in 1998, and then when Bethesda acquired the license and developed Fallout 3 in 2008, something interesting happened. A new studio with a different sensibility picked up those threads and wove them into an even larger world. The Capital Wasteland, a ruined Washington, D.C., and its surrounding region was filled with references to literature, film, music, and the history of the Fallout series itself. When Obsidian Entertainment made Fallout New Vegas in 2010, they brought back many of the original creative voices from Black Isle, and the result was perhaps the densest Easter egg collection in any Fallout game, built on top of a staggeringly complex narrative. When Bethesda returned with Fallout 4 in 2015 and then Fallout 76 in 2018, the tradition continued, growing more intricate with each installment. Every one of these games is a kind of archaeological site. They reward the player who treats them the way a careful excavator treats a dig, slowly, attentively, brushing away the surface layer to find what is buried underneath. That is what we are doing tonight. We are going through those layers, one at a time, following the thread from the very first Fallout all the way through to the most recent secrets still being discovered in Appalachia. Some of what you are about to hear is funny, some of it is melancholy, some a shade. Some of it is the kind of carefully crafted detail that makes you stop and sit quietly for a moment, just thinking about the people who put it there and the people who eventually found it. So, settle in. The Wasteland is a strange and quiet place this late. There are things in it worth noticing. One of the things that makes the Fallout universe so unusually immersive is that it was built on a contradiction. It takes place in a world that was technologically speaking, more advanced than our own, in some ways fusion-powered cars, personal robots, handheld computers in the 1950s, but it was also frozen in a particular cultural moment. The atomic age of the 1950s never ended in this alternate timeline. The sleek optimism of post-war America, the Jetson-style domestic confidence, the assumption that technology and government and corporate power were fundamentally good and would guide humanity toward a bright future, all of that persisted, hardened, became ideology, and eventually became the philosophical justification for the Vault-Tec Corporation's most extreme experiments. That contradiction between sunny surface and dark reality is the engine that powers almost every Easter egg and secret in the series. When you find a terminal log from a Vault-Tec employee cheerfully describing an experiment that is, on any reasonable reading, a monstrous violation of human rights, the horror is inseparable from the tone. It sounds like an internal memo about quarterly projections. It reads like a company newsletter. That dissonance is the joke, and the joke is also the nightmare. The developers leaned into this relentlessly. Whether it was the writers at Black Isle in the 1990s or the designers at Bethesda decades later, the sensibility remained consistent. Everything in the Fallout universe exists at an angle. The robots are chipper. The propaganda is bright and cheerful. The vault doors open with a pneumatic hiss and a jingle. And the things inside those vaults, the things people did to each other in the name of science and survival, are very dark indeed. Before we get to the specific Easter eggs and secrets, it is worth spending a moment with that atmosphere, because the best secrets in Fallout are not just isolated jokes or hidden loot, they are extensions of the world. They say something true about the universe they inhabit, and understanding that helps explain why, after all these years, players keep going back to look. It is also worth noting something about the scale of the secrets we are talking about. The Fallout Wiki, a community-maintained database of lore, character information, location details, and Easter eggs, is one of the most comprehensive wikis in gaming. It contains information about Easter eggs that were discovered within days of each game's launch. And it contains information about Easter eggs that were not discovered until years later. There are still debates about what certain hidden details mean. There are still terminals that players argue about. And according to Todd Howard himself speaking at the DICE Summit in 2016, there is at least one secret in Fallout 4 that, as of that statement, had still not been found. That fact alone should give you a sense of the depth we are working with. The other thing worth knowing before we begin is that Fallout secrets exist on multiple levels. There are the surface-level Easter eggs, funny references to movies or other games, pop culture nods that make you smile when you recognize them. Then there are the deeper ones, the environmental stories told entirely through scattered objects and terminal entries, requiring no explicit dialogue or quest marker to understand. And then there are the deepest ones, the hidden implications within the lore itself, the details that recontextualize the world if you notice them, the pieces of information that were placed there not to make you laugh but to make you think. We will cover all 3 levels tonight, and we will move through them slowly, because that is the only way to properly appreciate what was built here. The wasteland has been waiting for you. Let's take a walk through it. Hey, wherever you are right now, whether it's 3 in the morning and you can't sleep, or you're just winding down for the night, drop a comment and let me know. Tell me your location and the time. I'd love to know where in the world this is keeping people company. And if you haven't subscribed yet, there's a button for that. It means a lot. Section 2. The Vault-Tec's long, dark experiments. The vaults are where Fallout keeps its heaviest secrets. On the surface, in the promotional materials, the cheerful Vault Dweller posters, the upbeat instructional videos narrated by Vault Boy, they were sold to the public as shelters. Enormous underground facilities built to house communities of Americans through the nuclear storm and bring them safely out the other side into a rebuilt world. That was the pitch. That was what people believed when they walked through those massive circular doors and heard them seal behind them. The reality was considerably more complicated, and the ways that reality was hidden, discovered, and revealed across 6 games and decades of storytelling represent some of the most careful, long-form world-building in the history of the medium. The concept of vault experiments was not part of the original 1997 Fallout. That first game treated Vault 13 relatively straightforwardly. It was a shelter. The water chip broke. You needed to fix it. There were hints of bureaucratic dysfunction and overseer paranoia, But the core idea of vaults as deliberate social experiments came into focus with Fallout 2 in 1998. The writer Tim Kaine, who had been instrumental in the original game, described the vault experiment concept as giving the series a purpose beyond just saving some of the American population, then releasing them back into a radioactive dead zone. The experiments gave Vault Tech a reason to be evil rather than merely negligent. And from that point forward, every Vault and every Fallout game became a small horror story waiting to be read. What is remarkable about how the Vault experiments are revealed is that they are almost never explained directly. You do not receive a cutscene that says, "Here is what happened here." Instead, you find the evidence. You find the terminal logs written in the dry, bureaucratic language of corporate memos that describe what the experiment was and how it was supposed to work. You find the diaries of the people who lived through it. You find the aftermath, written in bones and locked doors, and the behavior of whoever is still alive. Let's start with some of the most carefully hidden ones. Vault 11, Fallout, New Vegas. Vault 11 is located in the Mojave Desert, and it contains one of the most quietly devastating pieces of storytelling in the entire Fallout series. From the outside, it looks like most vaults a large door sealed into a cliff face, the Vault Tech logo still visible through decades of dust. Inside, it is mostly dark and silent. There are skeletons, there are signs of a long-past struggle, and then there are the terminals. The experiment in Vault 11 was this. Every year, the Vault's residents were required to sacrifice one of their own. They were told that if they refused to make the sacrifice, the Vault's automated systems would kill everyone inside. If they complied, everything would continue as normal. What happened played out across years of terminal entries, journal logs, and audio recordings that the player pieces together while exploring was a complete collapse of whatever social norms and ethical principles the residents had arrived with. At first, they tried to organize the selection fairly. Then factions formed. Then the selection became a political tool, powerful people engineering the deaths of their enemies. Then the sacrifice of innocent people became normalized. Then people who refused to participate were themselves punished. The Vault's society folded in on itself, becoming exactly as vicious and hierarchical as the pre-war society it had been designed to escape. And then, near the end, 5 residents discovered the truth. The sacrifice had never been necessary. The Vault's system would not have killed them if they had refused. The whole thing was a test, an experiment in group psychology under conditions of perceived existential pressure. The 5 survivors, facing this revelation, made a different choice. They returned to the Vault's control room, knowing they would die there, and overrode the system, securing the Vault's survival in a way that required no more sacrifices. Then they walked into the facility's automated defense fire together. You find all of this not through a cutscene or an NPC explaining it. You find it in the logs, you piece it together. And then, at the very end of the terminal chain, you find a recording of those 5 residents making their final decision calm, resolved, the last act of people who had found their conscience too late but not too late to act on it. Obsidian put that in a game most people associate with casino heists and political factions. They put it in a vault that you do not have to visit to complete the game. They put it in the dark, behind doors that many players never opened. And it is one of the most affecting pieces of short fiction in gaming. Vault 92, Fallout 3. Vault 92 is tucked into the northern reaches of the Capital Wasteland, and it has one of the most insidious experiment designs of any vault in the series. The residents of Vault 92 were musicians selected specifically because they would not, as the design documents noted, question high stress levels in what was supposed to be a creative community. The Overseer's plan was to use them as test subjects for a program of white noise-induced aggression. While the residents slept, the Vault systems pumped specially engineered white noise into their quarters. The sound was designed to trigger psychotic breaks, to make people violent without them understanding why they had become violent. The terminal entries describing the experiment are written in the calm, detached language of a scientific report. There are phrases about acceptable casualty rates and stress index measurements. There are notes about which musical groups showed the highest aggression responses. There is a log from a security officer describing having to restrain 3 residents who had attacked each other during the night with no apparent cause. And then the vault simply collapsed from within. The logs end. The silence begins. By the time you arrive, the vault is full of feral ghouls, the transformed remains of the people who lived through whatever the experiment eventually became, and scattered amid the jazz instruments and music stands are the remnants of lives that were destroyed methodically by design for data that presumably nobody ever collected. The detail that makes Vault 92 particularly unsettling is the specificity of its victims. Other vaults had generic residents. Vault 92 had musicians, people who had been selected presumably because they were talented, and perhaps because they were considered worth preserving. The experiment was not conducted on people deemed disposable, it was conducted on people who had been specifically chosen, celebrated for their skills, and then subjected to something designed to take those same people apart. That specificity is the detail that the developers understood. They could have left Vault 92 as a generic tragedy. Instead, they gave it a texture that makes it feel real. Vault 112, Fallout 3. Vault 112 contains one of the most structurally creative experiments in the series, and also one of its most memorable in-game sequences. The residents of Vault 112 were placed in a state of suspended animation and connected to a virtual reality simulator called Tranquility Lane, a simulation of a 1950s American suburb, complete with white picket fences and children playing in the street. They have been there, dreaming in permanent virtual summer, for over 200 years. The overseer of Vault 112 was a scientist named Stanislaus Braun. He retained full consciousness and control within the simulation. And what he did with that power, for 2 centuries, was play with the residents the way a bored and increasingly disturbed child might play with action figures. He gave them roles to perform, made them reenact scenarios for his amusement, forced them to harm each other. When a resident angered him or when he simply needed a change of scenery, he reset the simulation, wiping everyone's memory of what had just happened. The residents of Vault 112 have died thousands of times in simulated scenarios they can no longer remember, at the hands of a man who never ages and never tires. The sequence where you enter Tranquility Lane to find your father, a key moment in Fallout 3's main quest, is genuinely unsettling in a way that many players do not fully register on their first playthrough. The suburb looks normal. The children seem normal. And then the cracks start to show. The way the NPCs speak in slightly off rhythms. The way Dr. Braun greets you with the cheerful menace of someone who has infinite power over everyone around him and knows it. The hidden detail within this hidden detail is the way out. There is an obvious path, one that involves carrying out Braun's requests, which means causing increasing harm to the residents. But there is also a hidden solution. In one of the houses, there is an abandoned terminal, a reference to a pre-simulation emergency plan that was put in place and then forgotten. Activating it triggers a sequence that ends Braun's control, but it is so thoroughly obscured that many players complete the quest without ever knowing it existed. The developers built an entire alternative resolution and then buried it so deep that most players never find it. That is Fallout at its most precise. Vault 101, Fallout 3. Your home vault. The vault you grew up in. The vault your father left, the vault whose overseer's bureaucratic dysfunction is one of Fallout 3's central early traumas. It seems like the straightforward vault, the one that exists to give the player character context and backstory, rather than to carry an experiment horror story. Except it does carry an experiment horror story, and most players miss it. According to the Fallout 3 official guide, Vault 101 was designed never to open. While other vaults were intended to eventually release their populations back into the wasteland at whatever point the vault tech hierarchy deemed appropriate, Vault 101's purpose was to run indefinitely. The doors were never supposed to unseal. The experiment was about the psychological effects of a population living forever underground, under the authority of an overseer whose power was absolute and whose word was final, with no external reference point and no possibility of escape. The second layer of the experiment, known only to the overseer and a small group of Vault Tech administrators, was specifically about testing the overseer's own behavior. Given complete, unchecked authority over a sealed population, with no external oversight and no term limits, what would a person do? What kind of society would they build? The answer, implied across the events of Fallout 3's opening act, is a deeply authoritarian one. The overseer of Vault 101 controls information, punishes deviation, exiles family members, and eventually turns the Vault's security apparatus against the player character themselves. The Vault that was supposed to be the safest possible place became, under the pressure of permanent isolation and concentrated power, something closer to a small totalitarian state. The experiment did not need to be labeled as such. You lived it. Vault 21. Fallout. New Vegas. Located right in the heart of New Vegas, Vault 21 has an experiment design that is almost charming by comparison with what came before. All disputes in Vault 21 were to be resolved by gambling. Room assignments, resource distribution, medical access, positions of authority, every conflict, every question, every disagreement went to a game of chance, with the higher roller winning. It is, on paper, a kind of radical egalitarianism. Nobody's claim is inherently stronger than anyone else's. The universe decides. The odds do not care about your family name or your social connections. If you want the better room, you play for it. If you want the medical supplies, you gamble. If you want to lead, you roll the dice. The practical result documented in the Vault's terminal entries and referenced in the dialogue of Sarah, the Vault's former overseer, who now runs the Surface Hotel, was a society in permanent low-level chaos. People who needed resources that they could not gamble well for went without. People who were naturally lucky accumulated disproportionate power. The Vault produced extraordinary gamblers and extraordinary inequality, and eventually Mr. House had the whole thing sealed, the residents relocated, and the space turned into a hotel. But here is the hidden layer. If you play the game carefully enough in New Vegas, you can find evidence that the gambling system in Vault 21 had a flaw that shaped the entire venture. Certain residents had discovered that the specific dice used in the Vault's formal dispute resolution ceremonies could be weighted. Those residents never lost a formal dispute. They accumulated everything. And they used what they had to acquire more, leveraging their gambling winnings into a kind of unofficial aristocracy that undermined the entire supposed equality of the system. The Vault-Tec experiment was designed to test whether chance-based allocation of resources was viable as a social system. The answer the Vault provided was, only until someone figures out how to cheat, which, historically speaking, never takes very long. Vault 81, Fallout 4. Vault 81 is one of the vaults in Fallout 4 that is relatively accessible. You can build a relationship with its residents, trade with them, even unlock it as a settlement. It seems, by Fallout standards, almost functional. People live there. They seem more or less okay. There is a doctor. There are children. The lights work. The hidden history, accessible through terminal entries in a restricted section that most players never fully explore, is considerably grimmer. Vault 81 was designed to be a medical research facility. Specifically, its residents who were not told this were intended to serve as test subjects for the development of cures to every known disease. The experiment involved gradually exposing residents to various pathogens and monitoring their immune responses. The scientists in charge of the experiment, as revealed in the terminals, had a crisis of conscience almost immediately. They could not bring themselves to deliberately infect the people living and working around them. Instead, they diverted the Vault's resources, conducted their research on animal subjects, and spent decades trying to quietly find a way to fulfill their assignment without harming anyone. Their overseer, when he discovered this, responded by shutting down the experiment records and sealing the section. What this means, played out across generations, is that Vault 81 survived by defiance, not dramatic defiance, not heroic defiance, but the quiet defiance of people who decided that the thing they had been asked to do was wrong and simply did not do it. There are no monuments to this. The residents do not know about it. The terminals are locked in a part of the vault most visitors never reach. The Vault-Tec experiment failed not because of a rebellion or a catastrophe, but because the scientists who were supposed to carry it out looked at the people around them and chose not to. That detail costs Bethesda nothing. It is text on a terminal in a room most players skip, and it makes Vault 81 one of the most quietly optimistic locations in a game that is not known for optimism. Vault 22, Fallout, New Vegas. Vault 22 is a plant vault. The idea was to develop hydroponic food production techniques that could sustain a population indefinitely underground. The residents were researchers and agricultural scientists, and the vault systems were designed to grow food in carefully controlled conditions at a large enough scale to remove any dependence on surface food sources. The vault is now almost completely overrun with vegetation. Every corridor is thick with it. The roots have pushed through walls. The air recyclers are clogged with growth. The lights in many sections have been overwhelmed by the organic matter pressing against them. And there are spore carriers, humanoid figures wrapped in fungal growth, hostile, barely recognizable as what they once were. The terminal entries tell the story methodically. A particular species of fungus entered the vault's ecosystem. At some point, the entries do not agree on when or how, and there are arguments between researchers about the probable source, which gives the record a feeling of real institutional debate rather than clean narrative. The fungus produced spores that affected the vault's residents. At first, the effects were subtle: changes in mood, altered sleep patterns, a certain compliance. Then, the behavioral effects grew more pronounced. Then the residents stopped acting like themselves entirely. Then they stopped seeming like themselves. The last coherent terminal entry in Vault 22 is from a researcher named Keeley, who managed to escape and is referenced in a New Vegas side quest that sends the player back into the vault. Reading backward through the entries, the late ones first, the increasingly calm and detached early ones last, you get a portrait of people who watched something terrible happening and kept meticulous records of it right up to the moment they could no longer hold a pen. That reverse chronology is something Fallout does throughout the series, and it is one of its most powerful narrative tools. The end of the story is visible the moment you enter. The beginning is what you have to find. The Control Vault. Vault 101's mirror. One detail that runs through the vault system across all the games is the concept of the Control Vault, a vault that was designed to function exactly as advertised, with no experiment, no twist, no hidden agenda. The vault that was supposed to show what a real shelter looked like when it worked as intended. This vault was Vault 8 in the California region, referenced in Fallout 2, which eventually became Vault City, a relatively prosperous, technologically advanced community built on exactly the kind of successful vault reintegration that Vault Tech claimed all the vaults were designed for. The existence of Vault City is itself a kind of dark joke within the lore. All the other vaults were experiments. One of them actually worked, and the society that grew out of the working vault is, in Fallout 2, one of the most morally troubling places in the game. Prosperous, exclusive, hostile to outsiders, built on the labor of a permanent underclass of non-citizens who are denied the benefits of the society they sustain. The Control Vault produced exactly the outcomes a functioning shelter was supposed to produce. And the society it produced looks, from certain angles, a lot like the society that built the vaults in the first place. That is the vault system's final, quiet observation. The experiment vaults are horrifying in obvious ways. The Control Vault is horrifying in a way you have to think about. The developers put that observation in there and never commented on it directly. They just let Vault City exist and let players draw their own conclusions. The vaults are the heart of the Fallout universe's darkness, and they are also the place where its best storytelling lives. Every one of them is a small parable, and none of them explain themselves. You find the pieces, you put them together, and then you walk back out into the wasteland with the weight of what you found. Section 3. The Capital Wasteland's Hidden Stories. Fallout 3. Fallout 3 launched in October 2008 and changed what many people understood a Fallout game to be. It moved the series into first person, opened up the world in ways the top-down originals could not, and planted the game in the ruins of Washington, D.C., a location so saturated with American history and symbolism that the creative possibilities were almost limitless. Bethesda hired writers and designers who clearly loved their source material. The Capital Wasteland is dense with references, hidden stories, and carefully crafted environmental details that reward the patient explorer in ways that still surprise players who have spent hundreds of hours in it. The thing about Fallout 3's Easter eggs is that they operate at two registers simultaneously. There are the references to films, to literature, to other games, to the history of the Fallout series, and then there are the original stories, told entirely through the environment, that have no external reference point and exist purely as pieces of human history preserved in the wreckage. The best of them combine both modes, a reference that does something meaningful within the game world, rather than merely acknowledging the thing it is referencing. The McClellan House and Ray Bradbury. This is arguably the most carefully considered Easter egg in Fallout 3, and it was identified by Joel Burgess, one of the game's designers, who said in a later interview that it was the Easter egg he was most proud of. In a quiet suburb of the Capital Wasteland, there is a ruined house. The family name on the mailbox is McClellan. Inside, the house is standard Capital Wasteland domestic ruin. Collapsed furniture, scattered cans, the usual signs of a life that ended abruptly. In the back of the house, in what used to be the children's bedroom, there are two small skeletons in bunk beds. and beside the bunk beds, there is a Protectron robot. If you activate the robot, it begins to read aloud quietly, in a flat mechanical voice from a poem. The poem is There Will Come Soft Rains by Sarah Teasdale, written in 1920. It is a poem about nature continuing undisturbed after humanity has destroyed itself. The specific lines the robot reads describe rain falling, swallows flying, frogs calling in the evening, all continuing peacefully, entirely without regard for the absence of the humans who used to be there to hear them. The final lines of the poem observe that not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. The poem was used by Ray Bradbury as the basis for a short story of the same name in his 1950 collection, The Martian Chronicles. Bradbury's story describes an automated smart home that continues running its domestic routines, making breakfast, reminding the family of appointments, reading poetry to the children long after its inhabitants have been killed. The house keeps working, the routines keep running, the announcements keep being made, and nothing comes home. The McClellan house is a direct reference to Bradbury's story. The name McClellan mirrors the family name in the story. The robot reading poetry to children who are no longer there mirrors the story's central image. And the specific poem Teasdale's vision of a world going on without humanity connects the house to a meditation on nuclear war and human self-destruction that Bradbury wrote at the dawn of the atomic age, when the anxiety that eventually produced the Fallout universe was just beginning to take shape. Burgess built this connection in layers. The name, the poem, the dead children, the robot still reading, none of it is announced. There is no quest marker. You either recognize it or you don't. And if you do, the capital wasteland, which is already a place of enormous melancholy, becomes something more, a place built by people who were thinking carefully about what the ruins mean and who reached back to the writers who thought about those same questions at the beginning. The HAL 9000 cameras, scattered throughout the capital wasteland, in buildings, along corridors, in various ruins, are surveillance cameras. The design of these cameras is distinctive. They feature a large circular lens and a small housing reminiscent of the HAL 9000, the artificial intelligence antagonist of Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey. HAL's design, the single red eye glowing in the dark, watching, evaluating, is one of the most recognizable images in science fiction cinema. The cameras in Fallout 3 replicate that design closely enough that players who recognize the reference find themselves in the middle of the capital wasteland, suddenly aware of being watched by the most famous fictional artificial eye in film history. What makes this work as more than just a wink is the context. HAL 9000's defining quality is that it is a machine that has been given contradictory directives and resolved the contradiction in the worst possible way, through deception and violence, in service of a mission its creators believed was more important than the lives of the people on board. That portrait of an AI driven to harm by institutional priorities sits naturally in the Fallout universe, where Vault-Tec machines continued administering their experiments long after there was any institutional authority left to report to. The cameras watching you are not watching you for anyone. They are just watching, because that is what they were built to do. Rockopolis, the hidden settlement. Most locations in the capital wasteland are marked on the map or can be reached through quests. Rockopolis is neither. It is a small settlement hidden in a rocky hillside, accessible through an opening that is nearly invisible during daylight and only slightly more visible at night, lit by a few small bulbs that most players would dismiss as ambient decoration if they noticed them at all. There are no map markers pointing to it. No NPC sends you there. No quest requires a visit. Inside, there is a long-dead traitor named Herbert Daring Dashwood, whose pre-war audio dramas you can find playing on the Capital Wasteland radio. Dashwood was an adventurer of some renown in the years immediately following the war, and Rockopolis was a settlement he founded with a ghoul companion named Argyle. The settlement was eventually destroyed by slavers, and Dashwood, wounded and unable to fight, watched it happen. He has been dead for many years by the time you find him. His remains are behind a locked door, and there is a holotape. The holotape is an apology. Not to a listener, Dashwood could not have known anyone would ever hear it. It is an apology to Argyle, who died defending the settlement while Dashwood survived. It is a quiet record of guilt and grief from a man who defined himself by adventure and heroism and then lived, at the end, with the knowledge that he had not been heroic when it mattered most. You find this in a location most players will never reach. There is no reward beyond the holotape itself. There is no quest completion, no experience points for finding it, no acknowledgement from the game that you have stumbled onto something worth finding. It is just there. Dashwood's apology, preserved in a dead settlement that nobody visits, still playing for anyone who happens to find the door. Stockholm, the hidden NPC. Above the gate of Megaton, the first major settlement most players encounter, there is a small balcony. It is positioned in such a way that it is completely inaccessible during normal play. You cannot get up there through any standard means. But on PC, if you use the console command that disables collision detection and allows you to walk through walls, you can float up to the balcony. There you will find a guard named Stockholm. Stockholm is fully voiced. He has dialogue. He is aware, in a way that most NPCs are not, that something unusual has happened. When you speak to him, he asks, with genuine bewilderment, how you got up there. He reacts to your presence as an impossibility, because from his perspective, from the perspective of the game's normal physics, it is one. He was placed there by the developers knowing that the only people who would ever find him were people using console commands on PC, people who had deliberately chosen to step outside the game's intended boundaries. The fact that Bethesda wrote dialogue for him at all is the Easter egg. They could have left him as a silent figure, present but inert. Instead, they made him a character who acknowledges the strangeness of the situation. Stockholm is, in a sense, the game winking at the player who found him a quiet acknowledgement that the developers knew exactly where the boundary was and put something behind it specifically for the people who would cross it. The Interplay Monument. In the Chevy Chase neighborhood of the Capital Wasteland, a particularly ruined and hostile area near the center of DC, there is a small square. It is easy to miss because the area is full of super mutants, and the tactical demands of surviving tend to dominate over the aesthetic pleasure of noticing architectural details. But in that square, there is a monument, a bronze globe circled by a small rocket. This is the Interplay logo. Interplay was the publisher that released Fallout 1 and Fallout 2. It was a company with a significant legacy in gaming that was effectively destroyed in the early 2000s by a combination of bad business decisions, market shifts, and the collapse of its relationship with its development studios. The logo in Chevy Chase is a memorial Bethesda, having acquired the Fallout license from the remnants of what Interplay had become, put the old publisher's logo in the ruins of Washington, D.C. Whether this reads as a tribute or as something more pointed is a matter of interpretation, but the choice to include it at all is a rare moment of corporate self-awareness in a medium that does not always have much of it. There is a second, quieter Interplay reference in the Point Lookout DLC, where loading screens and background references mention Isla Negra Holdings. Isla Negra is Spanish for Black Isle Studios, the developer of the original Fallout games. That studio was shut down by Interplay in December 2003, its staff laid off just as they were deep in development on what would have been Fallout 3. That cancelled project, codenamed Van Buren, had years of work behind it. The Black Isle Fallout 3 was never released. Bethesda's Fallout 3 is the one that exists. Putting Isla Negra in the DLC is Bethesda acknowledging the history. It is a quiet, specific gesture toward a group of people who built the original series and then watched it slip away from them, and it is buried in loading screen text that most players would scroll past without reading. But it is there. Vault Gary, the cloning experiment. Vault 108 is one of the more overtly horrifying vaults in Fallout 3, and also one of the darkest comedy bits in the game. The Vault's experiment was a cloning program specifically, the cloning of a single individual named Gary. By the time the player arrives, the Vault has become completely overrun by Gary clones in various stages of development and behavioral degradation. Every resident of the Vault is Gary. Every voice you hear is Gary. Every hostile that attacks you is Gary. The only word any of them say is their own name. Gary? The terminal entries reveal that the original Gary was, by most accounts, a deeply unpleasant person, aggressive, antisocial, apparently incapable of normal social interaction even before the cloning program made him the Vault's only population. The experiment generated copies that inherited his most destructive traits without the social conditioning that had kept the original Gary functioning. The Vault's legitimate residents were killed or driven out. The Garys took over, and the Garys, having no functional social structure among themselves, reduced the Vault to its current state through what the terminals diplomatically describe as ongoing interpersonal conflict. The horror of Vault Gary is real. It is genuinely unsettling to move through a place where the only thing that exists is variations of a single hostile consciousness, where individuality has been erased completely. But the joke lands because it is true to the Vault Tech philosophy. Someone designed this experiment. Someone signed off on it. Someone, somewhere in a pre-war corporate office, wrote a proposal suggesting that cloning a single maladjusted individual was a scientifically worthwhile use of an entire vault, and other people in suits approved it. That is the darkest part, not the Garys. The meeting where Vault 108 got funded. Point Lookout and the Punga Fruit Mystery. The Point Lookout DLC sends the player to a coastal swamp region of Maryland, which has become in the post-war years one of the stranger corners of the wasteland. It is more overgrown and less obviously industrialized than the capital wasteland proper, and it has a distinctly Gothic atmosphere, twisted vegetation, low fog, half-submerged structures, communities of inbred swamp dwellers who are not friendly to strangers. The hidden detail that most players miss entirely is the punga fruit. The native plant of Point Lookout produces fruit that has mildly addictive and mildly hallucinogenic properties. Most players simply harvest it as a food item. But there is a quest that asks you to investigate a local scientist's research into punga, and if you complete it, you learn something that recontextualizes the entire region. The punga plant produces its effects because it has been cross-pollinated with something. The terminal entries in the abandoned research station reference FEV, Forced Evolutionary Virus, the experimental mutagen that produced supermutants, and a range of other post-war biological horrors. The implication, never stated directly, is that the swamp's vegetation has been contaminated with something that was not supposed to get into the ecosystem, and that the indigenous people of Point Lookout have been, for generations, slowly consuming food laced with traces of it. The effects are mild enough that this mostly manifests as a regional food supply with unusual properties. But the people who have been eating punga fruit for generations are also, by the time you meet them, distinctly different from the wasteland's other human populations. The terminal notes suggest this is not coincidental. The contamination happened somewhere upstream, in one of the old military or scientific facilities in the region, and it has been quietly working its way through the ecosystem ever since. It is one of Fallout's most understated biological horror stories, tucked into optional research content in a DLC that many players never completed. The Republic of Dave. This is the counterpoint to the Vault experiments, a piece of Fallout 3 world-building that is not dark at all, just quietly, specifically hilarious. In the far northeast corner of the capital wasteland, there is a small settlement enclosed by a fence. It has its own flag. It refers to itself as an independent nation. Its name is the Republic of Dave. Dave is the settlement's founder, and he rules it as a monarchy with, as the game notes, the illusion of democracy. When you arrive, Dave is holding a presidential election. Dave is the only candidate running. Dave wins. Dave will always win because Dave controls who is allowed to vote and how the votes are counted. The people living in the Republic of Dave are mostly Dave's wives and children and a handful of followers who have accepted the arrangement. Some of them have clearly complicated feelings about it. There is a resident named Bob who wants to secede and form his own micronation. There are children who have been homeschooled on curriculum that Dave designed, which consists largely of the history of Dave. The Republic of Dave exists in Fallout 3 as a single unmarked location in a remote corner of the map with a handful of optional quests that reward you with a modest amount of caps. It is, in other words, completely optional. The game would be exactly the same without it. And yet it is one of the most precisely observed satirical sketches of political authority anywhere in the Fallout series. A micro-portrait of how small communities organize around charismatic leaders, how authority self-perpetuates, and how the trappings of democratic process can coexist perfectly comfortably with the absence of actual democratic substance. Bethesda put it in a corner that most players never visit, made it funny enough that its political observation lands without feeling didactic, and moved on. There is no moral attached. There is no quest that ends with Dave getting his comeuppance. The Republic of Dave continues as you leave it. Dave wins the election. Dave always wins the election. Section 4. The Mojave's Wild Side Fallout. New Vegas. Fallout. New Vegas was released in 2010, developed by Obsidian Entertainment on a remarkably tight schedule, reportedly about 18 months from start to finish. which is an almost impossible timeline for a game of its complexity and ambition. Many of the people at Obsidian had previously worked at Black Isle Studios on the original Fallout games, and they approached New Vegas with a specific agenda: to make a Fallout game that felt like the original Fallout games in spirit, even if it used Bethesda's engine and mechanics. The result was a game denser with faction politics, moral ambiguity, and hidden detail than almost anything before or since. New Vegas is also the Fallout game with the most explicitly structured Easter egg system, in the form of the Wild Wasteland perk. The Wild Wasteland perk. At character creation in New Vegas, you choose a trait for your character, an optional characteristic that modifies how the game plays. Most traits are mechanical adjustments: carry more weight but move slower, deal more damage but take more damage. Wild Wasteland is different. It has no direct mechanical benefit. What it does is unlock a layer of the game that does not exist without it. With Wild Wasteland active, specific locations in the Mojave contain events, encounters, and items that do not appear in any other playthrough. These additions are almost entirely references to films, to television series, to other video games, and they are almost always absurdist in tone, pitched slightly outside the realistic register of the game's main narrative. The first thing most players encounter with Wild Wasteland active is just southeast of Good Springs, the small town where the game begins. On the road leading out of town, there is an overturned refrigerator. Inside the refrigerator, there is a skeleton wearing a fedora hat and carrying the suave gambler's hat, an item that shares its appearance with the iconic fedora of a certain archaeologist adventurer. This is a reference to the scene in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, in which Indiana Jones survives a nuclear blast by hiding inside a lead-lined refrigerator. New Vegas's version of the scene ends slightly differently. The skeleton in the refrigerator suggests, gently but clearly, that the tactic did not work. That reference is available within minutes of starting the game. It sets the tone for everything. Wild Wasteland will show you a layer of the Mojave that is simultaneously funnier and stranger than the main game, commenting on pop culture through the specific lens of post-apocalyptic consequences. The Holy Frag Grenades and Monty Python. At Camp Searchlight, a location in the southeastern part of the Mojave, there is a church. In the basement of that church, with Wild Wasteland active, there is a container holding 3 grenades. These grenades are labeled Holy Frag Grenades. They are, in terms of game mechanics, the most powerful area of effect explosive weapons available without console commands. They are also limited in number. The 3 in the church basement are the only 3 that exist in the game without cheating. They are a reference to the Holy Hand Grenade of Antioch from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the 1975 British comedy film that is among the most referenced pieces of cultural material in video game history. The Holy Hand Grenade in the film is presented with full ceremonial gravity, a speech about counting to 3 and then throwing in the middle of a scene in which the knights who say nigh are attempting to slay a killer. Rabbit. The joke is the contrast between the solemnity of the ritual and the absurdity of the situation. New Vegas's version earns its reference because it actually makes the grenades powerful. They are not a joke item that does no damage. They are a legitimate, extremely useful piece of equipment that happens to be named after a Monty Python gag. The humor and the utility coexist, which is a more skillful execution than most games manage with their pop culture references. There are 2 more Monty Python references accessible without the Wild Wasteland perk. At Cottonwood Cove, spray-painted on a wall, are the words Romanes Unt Domus. Romans go home, the grammatically challenged Latin graffiti from Monty Python's Life of Brian that the Roman centurion forces Brian to correct on the wall. And in dialogue with a character named Jessup, one of the available responses to his surprise at your survival is, "I got better," a line from the Black Knight scene in Holy Grail. If you know where these are, New Vegas suddenly reads as a game that was written by people who had seen the Monty Python films many, many times. A Slave Obeys, the BioShock reference. The Gunrunner's Arsenal DLC for New Vegas includes a set of optional weapon challenges, tasks that ask you to kill specific enemies with specific weapons. Most of these are mechanical, designed to encourage players to use weapons they might not otherwise try. One of them is called A Slave Obeys, and it asks you to kill Mr. House, the enigmatic billionaire who controls New Vegas from within his sealed penthouse suite in the Lucky 38 casino with a golf club. A Slave Obeys, with a golf club. To players who have played the first BioShock, this is immediately recognizable. The climax of BioShock involves confronting Andrew Ryan, the founder and ruler of the underwater city of Rapture, in his office. Ryan is playing golf. He delivers a monologue about choice and submission, concluding with the phrase, "A man chooses, a slave obeys." Then he hands you the golf club and tells you to kill him with it. The parallel between Ryan and House is one that serious Fallout and BioShock fans have drawn for years. Both are brilliant, egocentric city builders who isolated themselves from the world to build their vision in a controlled environment, who surrounded themselves with proxy figures while they pursued long-term plans, and who came to occupy an ambiguous moral position within their respective games. They are not the same character, but they rhyme. Obsidian put the BioShock reference in a challenge name that players would only encounter if they were looking at the DLC's challenge list, and it adds a dimension to Mr. House that is not explicit in the main game. The Children of Adam's predecessor, the TES-04 utility poles. In the Freeside area of New Vegas, the rough neighborhood just outside the Strip proper, many of the utility poles carry small plaques. On those plaques are the letters TES-04, TES-04, The Elder Scrolls 4, Oblivion. This is a developer nod from Obsidian to Bethesda, whose engine and publishing support made New Vegas possible. The Elder Scrolls 4 had been released 4 years earlier, in 2006, and was at the time one of the most successful games Bethesda had published. Putting its reference code on utility poles in the most chaotic neighborhood of New Vegas is a quiet acknowledgement of the relationship between the two studios. A thank you buried in set dressing that only players who stop to read the pole plaques would ever find. There is a similar reference in Fallout 4, where a plant exclusive to the Elder Scrolls universe, the Nirnroot, recognizable to Skyrim and Oblivion players, by its distinctive glowing appearance and the soft sound it makes, appears growing in the Commonwealth. In Fallout 4, it is labeled simply as a Mutfruit variant, but its appearance is unmistakable to Elder Scrolls fans. The two series exist in entirely different universes, separated by centuries of fictional history, but they share a designer sensibility and a corporate parent, and occasionally they let that slip. The Star Wars Cantina and what wasn't there. In the town of Nipton, a small, recently burned settlement that represents one of the more memorable shock moments in New Vegas's early game, there are two ruined houses. In a normal playthrough, they are just ruins, with the usual scattered furniture and atmospheric decay. With Wild Wasteland active, those two houses contain something very specific: the skeletal remains of what the game files identify as Owen and Beru. Owen Lars and Beru Lars are Luke Skywalker's aunt and uncle in Star Wars: A New Hope. They are murdered by Imperial stormtroopers while Luke is away, their homestead burned. The image of their farm on fire at night is one of the most iconic in the original trilogy. The Wild Wasteland version of this scene at Nipton does not explain itself. Two skeletons, two burned houses. The game does not put a label on it. Players who recognize Star Wars recognize the reference. Players who do not see two more dead residents of a town that has clearly already seen terrible things. The reference works either way. But for players who recognize it, it adds a layer to Nipton's existing horror, a real place in the game world, already devastated by a very specific kind of casual cruelty, getting a quiet overlay from one of fiction's most famous depictions of the same. Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, the gnome scene. In the Mojave, with Wild Wasteland active, there is a location where 7 garden gnomes are arranged in a tableau. They are digging. They are positioned around a grave. The grave holds the body of a woman in a dress. Snow White, mid-dig in a Fallout wasteland, is presumably not going to wake up from anything. This is, on its surface, a dark joke. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs ends with the prince's kiss, waking the princess from the evil queen's poisoned sleep. The New Vegas version of the scene gives you the aftermath of an alternative reading a story, where nobody came to wake her up. The gnomes keep digging, presumably, because that is what they know to do. What makes this more than a simple movie reference is the location. The grave is in the middle of the Mojave Desert. The gnomes are plastic. The woman is a skeleton. Whatever this place was before the bombs, it is just wasteland now, and the fairy tale got absorbed into the wasteland's general catalog of things that ended badly. That is the Wild Wasteland perk's sensibility in a single image. Pop culture, processed through the Fallout universe, tends to end this way. The Good Springs Graveyard's hidden loot. This one requires a shovel, which most players have never thought to use. In the Goodspring Cemetery, the small graveyard near the beginning of the game where you are buried at the game's opening, there are 3 graves that look unremarkable. They have headstones. They look like graves. With a shovel, you can dig them up. The loot inside is modest but genuinely useful for the early game. A combination of bottle caps, minor consumables, and occasionally a weapon or piece of armor that gives a newly created character a meaningful early advantage. The developers buried real items in the dirt, in the actual starting cemetery of the game, behind the action of using a shovel on a grave, which most players would never think to try because nothing in the game tells you to do it. This is the New Vegas design philosophy in miniature. The reward exists. The game gives you the tool to get it. It does not tell you to use the tool here. The players who think about what a shovel does, who look at a graveyard and wonder what might be in it, who are curious enough to try those players, get something. Everyone else walks past. The Crashed Vertibird and Daisy Whitman. This is an Easter egg that rewards players who paid attention to Fallout 2, a game released 12 years before New Vegas, on a different platform, with a completely different visual style and gameplay. In Fallout 2, there is a crashed vertibird, a kind of military VTOL aircraft that appears throughout the series near the town of Klamath. The pilot of that crashed vertibird is identified in the game files as having survived. In Fallout New Vegas, in the small town of Novak, there is a resident named Daisy Whitman. She is an old woman, friendly to the player, with a background as a vertibird pilot. Her biography, found in terminal entries and her own dialogue, identifies her as someone who crashed a vertibird near Klamath decades earlier and survived to make her way eventually to the Mojave. And then there is Lily. Lily Bowen is a potential companion in New Vegas, a Nightkin super mutant, large and frightening to look at, carrying a blade made from a piece of helicopter rotor. The rotor blade, the game's files confirm, is from a crashed vertibird. The same crashed vertibird. Daisy Whitman survived the crash and ended up in Novak. A piece of the vertibird's rotor blade ended up as the weapon of a Nightkin companion. These connections are never pointed out. No quest draws them together. No dialogue explicitly links Daisy and Lily. The connection exists purely for players who know the geography of the Fallout universe well enough to recognize what they are looking at. That is the Obsidian approach to Easter eggs at its most refined. Not a joke that stops the game to announce itself, but a thread of continuity that rewards the player who has been paying attention for 12 years. Section 5. The Commonwealth's Buried Memories, Fallout 4. Fallout 4 arrived in November 2015 with the most polished presentation Bethesda had produced for the series. Up to that point, a voiced protagonist, a dense urban environment built on the ruins of Boston, and a companion system that allowed for genuine NPC relationships. It was also, by the standards of the previous 2 mainline games, more action-oriented, and its writing attracted more mixed reactions than Fallout 3 or New Vegas had. But as a platform for hidden details, Easter eggs, and environmental storytelling, it was extraordinarily rich. Boston is a city with a lot of history, and Bethesda knew it. The Commonwealth is dense with real-world references transformed by the nuclear age, and some of the most interesting Easter eggs are the ones that connect the real Boston to the game's version of it. Diamond City's Red Seat, Ted Williams. Diamond City, the Commonwealth's largest settlement, built inside Fenway Park, is an obvious Boston reference that the game does not try to hide. The giant green monster wall, the field, the layout. Any Red Sox fan will recognize it immediately. But inside Diamond City, there is a specific detail that most players will miss without a scoped weapon to zoom in on the stadium seats. In the stands surrounding Diamond City, almost every seat is the same green color. One is not. One seat, in a specific section of the stands, is painted red. This mirrors a real detail in the actual Fenway Park. In Section 42, Row 37, Seat 21, there is a red seat among the park's iconic green ones. It marks the landing spot of the longest home run ever hit at Fenway Park, a 502-foot blast struck by Ted Williams on the 9th of June, 1946. Williams, arguably the greatest hitter in the history of baseball, played his entire career with the Red Sox. The red seat is a permanent memorial to that specific moment, and Bethesda replicated it in Diamond City with sufficient accuracy that you need a scope to find it. The detail costs nothing. It does not affect gameplay. It is not attached to a quest. It is simply there for the player who looks carefully enough, paying tribute to a piece of Boston history that predates the Fallout universe by decades. Prost Bar. The Cheers reference. Anyone who grew up watching American television in the 1980s will recognize the Prost Bar immediately. Located in a section of the Commonwealth near Park Street Station, Prost is a bar modeled on the one from Cheers, the long-running NBC sitcom set in a Boston bar where, as the theme song had it, everybody knows your name. The similarities are extensive. The layout mirrors the Cheers bar. There is baseball memorabilia on the walls. And seated in various positions around the bar, in poses that mirror the show's recurring characters, are skeletons wearing outfits that match those characters. The regulars are still there. They just happen to be dead. The bar has been closed for about 200 years, give or take, and yet the scene is almost recognizable. The same positions, the same setting, the same suggestion of a place where people used to gather and talk and feel, briefly, known. The name Prost is the German word for cheers, which is both the obvious Cheers reference and a joke in its own right. It is on the nose while also being exactly oblique enough to fit the fallout. Universe's style. Bethesda could have named it simply Cheers Bar and made the reference unavoidable. Instead, they gave it a name that requires one step of lateral thinking, filtering out the players who are not paying close enough attention. Walden Pond and the Transcendentalists. Located in the Commonwealth is a location called Walden Pond, the actual Walden Pond, made famous by Henry David Thoreau's 1854 book about his 2 years of deliberate simplicity living beside it. Thoreau's experiment in stripping life down to essentials, in understanding what is actually necessary and what is accumulated habit, is one of the foundational texts of American transcendentalism. In Fallout 4, Walden Pond is the site of a gift shop, now ruined and booby-trapped, with a drainage ditch nearby that serves as the only accessible entrance. In the shop's basement, a group of raiders are having a conversation about Thoreau, about transcendentalism, about the nature of self-sufficiency and the question of what constitutes a meaningful life. They are not very good at the philosophy, but they are genuinely engaging with it. The joke is the setting post-apocalyptic raiders as unwitting Thoreauvians, people who have, through the circumstances of being born into a world that provides almost nothing, achieved the kind of radical material simplicity Thoreau chose deliberately. Whether their version of it is meaningful in the way Thoreau intended is a question the game leaves open. Nick Valentine, if he is your companion, has a line here that stops a lot of players cold. He describes Walden Pond as the 4 most important walls in the Commonwealth. Whether he means the gift shop walls, or the cabin where Thoreau wrote, or the walls of the pond itself, the statement is ambiguous. And Valentine's flat affect makes it even harder to parse. It might be sincere, it might be deadpan irony. Nick Valentine is very difficult to read, which is part of why he is such a beloved companion character. Dunwich Borers and H.P. Lovecraft. In the northeastern part of the Commonwealth, there is a quarry called Dunwich Borers. The name is a direct reference to H.P. Lovecraft's short story The Dunwich Horror, published in 1929, and the location plays with Lovecraftian aesthetics throughout. The quarry leads down through a series of underground levels, each deeper and stranger than the last, with environmental details that suggest something has been here for a very long time, far longer than the quarry operation, far longer than Vault-Tec, possibly far longer than human settlement in the region at all. The deeper levels of Dunwich Borers contain things that do not fit the Fallout universe's usual rules. There are ancient altar-like formations. There are inscriptions that predate the war. There is a specific terminal that contains records suggesting the quarry workers began experiencing visions and behavioral changes after breaking through to a lower level. There are audio logs of foremen describing workers who could no longer explain what had happened to them during their shifts. And at the very bottom there is something in the water. The game does not tell you what it is. The lighting makes it difficult to see clearly. The environment discourages lingering. But there is something there. And the something is old. Bethesda had included H.P. Lovecraft references in the Fallout universe before Dunwich Building in Fallout 3 shares a name and a similarly eerie underground aesthetic, but Dunwich Borers in Fallout 4 goes further, suggesting that the Lovecraftian element is not merely a reference, but an actual presence in the game world. Something pre-human, incomprehensible, and very old exists in the depths under the Commonwealth. The Fallout universe, which was already saturated with scientific horror and institutional evil, turns out to also have something older and stranger underneath it all. That something is never named, never explained, never addressed by any quest. It is there. You can find evidence of it. And then you come back to the surface and the world continues as normal, and you carry the knowledge of what was down there with you. Todd Howard's Unfound Secret. In January 2016, at the DICE Summit, an annual gaming industry conference, Todd Howard, the creative director of Fallout 4, made a statement that has haunted the game's community ever since. He mentioned that there was something in Fallout 4, something on a terminal, he specified that not many people were talking about, something he had not heard anyone find yet. That was in 2016. The statement has been in circulation since then. Players have combed through every terminal in the game, cross-referenced every entry, compared notes, shared coordinates, built spreadsheets. The secret has been searched for systematically, using data mining tools and community coordination on a scale that rivals anything attempted for the title screen panoramas in Minecraft. And as far as can be confirmed, nobody has definitively identified what Howard was referring to. This is either the greatest Easter egg in video game history or an extraordinarily successful piece of marketing mythology, and at this point it may be impossible to tell which. The game is nearly 10 years old. The community that plays it seriously has been through it with extraordinary thoroughness. And somewhere, possibly on a terminal in the Commonwealth, there is something that nobody has found yet. Or found and not recognized. Or recognized and not connected to what Howard was describing. The possibility is itself the Easter egg now. The idea that something is still hidden, still waiting, in a game that millions of people have played, that is the kind of mystery that does not require a solution to be meaningful. The Prydwen Scrolls. The Prydwen is the Brotherhood of Steel's flagship airship, a massive craft that appears in the sky over the Commonwealth roughly midway through Fallout 4's main story. It is impossible to miss once it arrives. It dominates the sky, its engines a constant presence in the ambient soundscape of the game. On the Prydwen's deck, among the Brotherhood's gear and equipment, there is an item that has no business being there, a copy of the Elder Scrolls, an actual, literal copy, albeit transformed into the Fallout universe's aesthetic. It is a book. It is there. And like the Nirnroot growing somewhere in the Commonwealth, and the TES-04 plaques in New Vegas, it is a quiet acknowledgement of the shared DNA between Bethesda's two great franchises, a universe that runs on swords and magic, and a universe that runs on radiation and laser rifles, existing in the same corporate creative ecosystem, occasionally gesturing at each other across the wall that separates them. The Hanging Man of Vault 81. Vault 81, as discussed in the Vault section, contains hidden history in its locked-off research wing. But there is another detail in the Vault's main residential area that many players walk past without registering. In one of the residential quarters, if you look up at the ceiling, not a direction most players think to look, there is a skeleton. It is positioned as if someone climbed to a high point inside the vault and jumped, or otherwise came to rest in a position that defies the normal expectations of where skeletons end up. The game does not explain it. There is no terminal log, no note, no associated quest. There is just a skeleton in a position that suggests a story, high on a wall, in a vault that is otherwise characterized by a kind of forced normalcy. This is environmental storytelling at its most minimal. The skeleton's position implies something terrible without stating it. The absence of any explanation is the point. Whatever happened to this person is not documented, not remembered, not part of anyone's living memory in the vault. It is just the evidence, suspended in place by the peculiarities of whatever structural damage let it end up where it is, or, and this is the other reading, by a very specific, very deliberate kind of ending. The vault keeps going, the community keeps functioning, and nobody looks up. Codsworth and Your Real Name. Most players know that Codsworth, the pre-war family robot who has been maintaining the player's pre-war home for 200 years, can address the player character by name, and that the game contains a substantial list of pre-recorded names he can actually speak rather than using a generic placeholder. What fewer players know is how many names that list contains and how deep it goes. The complete list of names Codsworth can say was pulled from the game files, and it runs into the hundreds, including unusual names, names with non-standard spellings, names that one might not expect a AAA game to bother with. The team went far enough down the list that players with genuinely uncommon names have found their own included, and the surprise of hearing a robot address them by the right name in a game released in 2015, with recording sessions that must have taken considerable time and budget, is consistently reported as one of the most unexpectedly touching moments in recent gaming. The list also includes a few joke names, names from famous characters in other media, developer names, and one name Fido that presumably exists because someone at Bethesda thought it would be funny to hear Codsworth call you Fido for 200 years. Section 6. Appalachia's Mysteries. Fallout 76. Fallout 76 launched in November 2018 and had one of the more turbulent receptions of any game in the Fallout series. Its multiplayer-focused structure, its initially sparse narrative content, and a series of early technical and customer service issues made the first year of its life difficult. But the game has been consistently updated since launch, and over time its world, the post-war state of West Virginia, called Appalachia, has developed into one of the more atmospheric regions in the Fallout universe. It is a game that, perhaps because of its troubled launch, is often overlooked when people list the best Easter eggs in the series. That is a mistake. The Golden Holotape, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Somewhere in Appalachia, players can find the body of a deceased ghoul. His name is Willie. He is holding a specific item, the Golden Holotape. The Golden Holotape is a reference to the golden ticket in Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Willie's name echoes Willy Wonka, the factory's owner. The Golden Holotape serves the same narrative function as the golden ticket. It is a rare object that promises access to something extraordinary for whoever possesses it. In the context of Fallout 76's post-war Appalachia, a dead ghoul clutching a holotape that references a chocolate factory reward for children carries a specific weight. The fantasy of a promised reward, preserved in the wrong world, in the wrong hands, long after any factory could be running. Colossal Cave, the Pluff reference. In the Glassed Cavern, one of Fallout 76's underground locations, there is a small area containing a collection of wooden blocks. The blocks spell a word, Pluff. This is a reference to Colossal Cave Adventure, one of the first text-adventure computer games ever created, developed in the mid-1970s by Will Crowther. In Colossal Cave Adventure, typing Pluff at specific locations caused a mysterious, magical effect. It was a command word that did something the game never fully explained, a bit of deliberate mystery woven into an early computer game by a programmer who thought unexplained words were interesting. The wooden blocks spelling Pluff in Fallout 76's cave are a tribute to the earliest days of video game hidden content, the precursor tradition that eventually produced the concept of the Easter egg itself. The first Easter egg in gaming history is commonly attributed to a programmer named Warren Robinette, who hid his name in an Atari 2600 game called Adventure in 1979, having been denied a developer credit by his employer. The tradition of hiding things in games begins in the 1970s, with programmers who wanted to leave marks and had to be clever about how they did it. Pluff is a nod to those beginnings, buried in a cave in post-war West Virginia. The Mad Hatter's Tea Party. Somewhere in Appalachia, there is a tea party set up in the ruins of a building. It is arranged with care tables, chairs, cups, the full setting, and it is occupied by skeletons in various states of formal dress. The arrangement mirrors the Mad Hatter's Tea Party from Alice in Wonderland, right down to the positioning of the participants. This is not a unique concept in the Fallout series. Skeleton tableaux referencing classic fiction are almost a genre of their own across the games, but the Appalachian version is more carefully executed than most. The items on the table include period-appropriate tea service props. The skeletons are seated in positions that suggest actual conversation, and the location, deep enough in an already atmospheric region, means that most players stumbling onto it do so in a state of mild unease that the Mad Hatter aesthetic amplifies rather than deflates. The Breaking Bad reference. Fallout 76 takes place in West Virginia, which means it has relatively little geographic overlap with Breaking Bad's Albuquerque, New Mexico setting. That did not stop the developers from including a reference. In Appalachia, there is a blue car. In the trunk of the blue car, there are blue chemical drums. The blue car is a reference to Walter White's blue product, the signature blue meth that is Breaking Bad's central MacGuffin. The color coding is precise enough to be unmistakable to anyone who has seen the show, and like most Breaking Bad references in media, it lands as a specific acknowledgement of a very specific aesthetic choice from a very specific television moment. It is a small detail. The car is easy to miss, but finding it, in a post-apocalyptic West Virginia, triggers exactly the kind of mental double-take that the best Easter eggs produce. A moment of recognition, followed by the realization that yes, someone put this here, deliberately, For exactly this reason, the Deathclaw named Stripe. In the Old World Blues DLC for New Vegas, there was a tiny Deathclaw named Stripe, referencing the Gremlins franchise. Fallout 76 carries a version of this tradition forward in a different way, but the broader point about the series' relationship with tiny, terrifying creatures named after fictional monsters deserves its own moment. Deathclaws are among the Fallout universe's most iconic creatures, large, fast, extraordinarily dangerous predators that were originally engineered from pre-war chameleons. This is canonical, enhanced through repeated exposure to FEV, and released into the wild, where they have been consistently outcompeting every other large predator for 200 years. They are not cute. They are not intended to be cute. They are efficient killing machines that the game uses as a kind of difficulty ratchet. Deathclaw territory is a reliable signal that things are going to get very dangerous very quickly. The developers have, over the years, quietly delighted in subverting this by occasionally placing tiny Deathclaws in unexpected contexts. The Stripe reference in Old World Blues, various baby Deathclaw sightings, and the general tradition of Deathclaw variants being given names that do not fit the terror they represent. This pattern, the horrifying creature with the inappropriate name, is one of those recurring Fallout jokes that grows more amusing with each new iteration. The Cargo Drone Mystery. This is one of Fallout 76's most genuinely unresolved mysteries. In the western part of Appalachia, near the Mothman Museum, cargo drones cluster. They hover, they circle, they fly in patterns over a section of the map that cannot be reached through normal. Play a section of sky over what appears to be an unreachable portion of the terrain. Players have tried for years to reach whatever the drones are circling. They have used every available exploit, every glitch, every method of bypassing terrain boundaries. The drones continue to circle. Whatever they are converging on has not been definitively identified, and the game has not, as of the most recent updates, provided an explanation. This may be a quirk of the game's pathing system, a case where the drone AI has found a point in the environment that its pathfinding loops around by accident. Or it may be something deliberate, a detail placed there knowing that players would notice, would speculate, would search. Fallout 76's world has enough empty space and enough deliberate mystery building that either interpretation is possible. The Mothman Museum is already one of the game's more atmospheric locations, drawing on the real-world West Virginia folklore of the Mothman, a cryptid reported in Point Pleasant in the late 1960s. Drones circling in the sky above it seems, atmospherically, entirely appropriate. The mystery continues. The Two-Toilet Duel. Game of Thrones. The official Fallout 76 Vault Dweller's Survival Guide, the physical companion book released with the game, contains, in its description of a specific location in the forest region, the notation, two skeletons face off on a leafy hillside, each sitting on a toilet. The duel doesn't end well for either party. The duel is a reference to Game of Thrones. The specific death being referenced is the death of Tywin Lannister, killed by his son Tyrion while seated on a privy. This is one of the most memorable deaths in the television series, occurring at a moment of maximum humiliation for a character defined by pride and dignity. The Fallout 76 version doubles the reference by having two figures face each other on toilet thrones, a duel that, from the annotations, ended badly for both combatants. The fact that the Easter egg is in the official companion guide, not just in the game files, but in the officially published physical book, suggests that this is not a hidden detail the developers expected to remain obscure for long. It is a reference they were proud enough of to highlight in print, and yet most players who own the companion guide have never read that specific passage, because official companion guides are the kind of thing people own and do not read, which means it remains, in practice, unknown to the majority of the game's community. Section 7. The original Wasteland Fallout 1 and 2. The original Fallout games occupy a special place in the series because they are simultaneously the foundation of everything that came after and genuinely different experiences from the later games. They are top-down isometric RPGs from the late 1990s, built on a turn-based combat system and a dialogue tree structure that allowed for a level of character build expression that the later first-person games only partially replicated. They are also games that were made by relatively small teams who knew each other well and had strong opinions about what they were building. That combination, small teams, strong opinions, and the creative freedom that comes from working before the series became a multi-billion-dollar franchise, produces a very specific flavor of Easter egg. The Black Isle game's hidden content is less about pop culture references and more about the developers leaving their own marks on the world they built. Developer names in the tombstones of Fallout 2. In Fallout 2, there is a cemetery called Golgotha outside the town of the Den. It is a fairly bleak place, as cemeteries in post-war California tend to be. The headstones are weathered and sparse, and if you read them carefully, you find names. Many of the headstones in Golgotha bear the names of people who worked on Fallout 2. One reads, Jason Anderson, no longer a living god. Jason Anderson was a designer on the original Fallout, and the specific joke, no longer a living god, references a hidden detail in Fallout 1 where the game's credits, accessed through a specific screen, describe Anderson as a living god. The Fallout 2 tombstone is the sequel's gentle answer to that, a mock grave acknowledging the original and its contributor. Other stones carry the names of writers, designers, and programmers. The graffiti of New Reno contains developer credits hidden in the wall's spray-painted messages. One area of the game has NPCs who remark that New Reno was designed by Chris Avallone and scripted by Tom French, which is simply true, stated in-world by fictional characters as a piece of factual information. The boundary between the game's fiction and the reality of its creation becomes porous in Fallout 2 in a way that is genuinely unusual for a commercial RPG. Fergus, the NPC. In Arroyo, the tribal village where the player character of Fallout 2 begins the game, there is a child standing by a well. The child's name is Fergus. Fergus Urquhart was the head of Black Isle Studios, the founder, the creative director, the person most responsible for the studio's culture and output. In Fallout 2, he is a child standing by a well in a tribal village. There is no quest associated with him. He does not advance any narrative. He is simply Fergus, standing there, perhaps as an acknowledgement that the people who built this world are, in some sense, also part of it. Later in the game, there is a character named Fergus who is the subordinate of President Tandy, a major political figure in the new California Republic. This second Fergus appears in a context of actual political authority and institutional function, which is a different kind of acknowledgement than the child by the well. Not just a name drop, but a suggestion that the person behind the name has a role in how things are organized and maintained. The Bridgekeeper and Monty Python. In Fallout 2, at a specific location on the world map, there is a random encounter with an NPC called the Bridgekeeper. He is dressed in robes and is guarding a bridge. He will not let you cross without answering his questions. The questions are riddles. They are the same riddles or variations of them that the Bridgekeeper of the Bridge of Death asks in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. He asks for your name. He asks your quest. He asks about the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow, though in the Fallout version, the specifics are adapted to the post-nuclear setting. What makes this encounter more interesting than a simple film reference is its optional nature. You can answer the questions correctly and be allowed to pass. You can answer them incorrectly and be pushed off the bridge. Or, and this is the option that rewards players who have genuinely internalized the Monty Python film, you can ask him what he means by an unladen swallow, African or European. The Bridgekeeper, wrong-footed by a question he was not prepared for, falls off the bridge himself. The joke requires both player knowledge of the film and player willingness to engage with the encounter on its own terms, rather than treating it as an obstacle to get past. It rewards engagement. That is the design philosophy of both Fallout 2 and Monty Python simultaneously. The best moment is the one you find by actually paying attention. Sulik and the Isley Brothers. Sulik is a tribal companion available in Fallout 2, a large, powerful fighter with a distinctive speech pattern and a deep religious tradition involving the speaking of spirits. In normal gameplay, Sulik is a combat-focused companion whose spiritual beliefs add texture to his dialogue, without particularly affecting the mechanics of traveling with him. In a specific, unmarked location on the world map, if Sulik is in your party and you speak to him in a particular way, he will occasionally say three things in sequence. A little bit softer now, then a little bit louder now, then shout. These are the repeated instructions from Shout by the Isley Brothers, a song from 1959 that became a landmark of early soul and rhythm and blues. The song's famous call and response pattern between the lead singer and the crowd getting quieter, then louder, building to the titular shout was sufficiently well known by 1998, when Fallout 2 was released, that the reference would have landed for a significant portion of the game's audience. It is also, given who is saying it, a tribal warrior in a post-nuclear California, speaking to the spirits of his ancestors, one of the stranger deliveries of an Isley Brothers reference in any medium. The special encounters. Fallout 2 has a system of special random encounters that activate on the world map events that only appear once, that occur at random intervals, and that are entirely optional and entirely distinct from the main narrative. Some of these are dark, some are funny, some are references, and several are among the most distinctive pieces of creative work in the original Fallout games. One encounter places you at a car wreck in the desert, where a group of men in suits stand around what appears to be a briefcase. The briefcase glows. Nobody can explain what is in it. The encounter is a reference to Pulp Fiction, specifically to the briefcase that Jules and Vincent are transporting for Marcellus Wallace, the object whose contents are never revealed, whose golden glow when opened is one of cinema's most famous unanswered questions. In Fallout 2, the briefcase glows, the suited men are hostile, and whatever is inside is not something you can easily take. Another encounter puts you in the presence of the Guardian of Forever, a large stone ring standing alone in the desert. This is a reference to the Guardian of Forever from Star Trek, the original series, specifically the episode The City on the Edge of Forever. The Guardian is a time portal, and the episode is often cited as one of the best in the original series. In Fallout 2, the encounter is brief and offers no time travel. The Guardian is just there. It has nothing to say. But for players who recognize it, its presence in the California wasteland, standing alone and silent in the desert, has a specific quality, the suggestion that time travel is possible, but not particularly useful in a world that has already reached its worst point. Section 8. Environmental Storytelling. Silent Stories Told in Bones. This section is different from what came before. The Easter eggs and references we have been discussing are hidden details placed by developers who wanted players to find them jokes, tributes, acknowledgments. What I want to talk about now is something slightly different. The storytelling that happens in the Fallout universe without any external reference point, told entirely through the physical environment the player moves through. The Scattered Bones story is one of the things Fallout does better than almost any other game series. You walk into a room and you find something. You do not receive a quest. Nobody explains what you are seeing, but the arrangement of what is there, the objects, the bodies, the furniture, the notes, the positions of the dead, tells you everything, if you are willing to stop and read it. The Basement Survivor. In Fallout 3, in a ruined house in the Capital Wasteland, there is a basement. In the basement, there is a skeleton. Beside the skeleton, there is a series of tally marks scratched into the wall. The tally marks are arranged in groups of 5, the standard system for counting days, and there are many, many of them. Months, by the count. Possibly over a year. Beside the tally marks, there is a collection of empty food cans and empty water bottles. The arrangement suggests someone who found shelter on the day the bombs fell and stayed, surviving for as long as supplies held out. No weapons, no armor. Just a person who went underground on the worst day in human history and counted the days, alone, until there was no more reason to count. There is no holotape here, no final letter, no name. The tally marks are the entire story. And that absence of explanation, the fact that whoever this person was did not leave a record, or left one that was lost, or simply stopped writing before they thought to start, is itself a kind of statement about the nature of survival. Most people do not narrate their own endings. Most people just reach the end. The couple in the bathtub. This is one of the most frequently cited environmental stories in Fallout 3. In a ruined house, upstairs in the bathroom, there is a bathtub. In the bathtub, there are 2 skeletons. They are positioned close to each other. There are 2 wine bottles nearby empty. There is a holotape. The holotape is a note, recorded in the days leading up to or immediately following the Great War. It does not describe the war itself. It describes 2 people who decided that if the world was ending, they would end it on their own terms together, with wine, in a warm bathtub. The note is calm. It is specific. It mentions ordinary things, the sound outside, the color of the sky, the fact that the bath was warm. It ends mid-sentence. Bethesda put this story in a house that is not on any map marker, attached to no quest, requiring no particular direction to find. You stumble onto it, or you do not. And when you do, the Capital Wasteland, which can sometimes feel like an abstract space for combat encounters, becomes something else, a place where people lived and died, where specific human choices were made on specific days, where the evidence of those choices has been preserved by 200 years of dust and radiation. The Keller family holotapes. This is an extended environmental story that unfolds across the entire capital wasteland. The Keller family left 5 holotapes scattered at different locations around the map, not grouped together, not attached to a quest, not associated with any map marker. Each tape contains part of an access code for a hidden bunker. Each tape also contains a piece of the family's story: where they were, what they were doing, how they were trying to survive. The family, parents, and children became separated during the chaos of the bombs. Each tape was recorded at a different location as they tried to find each other and make their way to the bunker they had prepared. The tapes are numbered, and if you find them in order, you get the story chronologically. If you find them out of order, which is more likely, given how scattered they are, you get fragments, pieces of a narrative that you are assembling as much as discovering. The bunker is real. The access code, assembled from the 5 tapes, opens it. Inside, there is loot, including one of the game's most powerful weapons. But the reason players remember the Keller family is not the loot. It is the story on the tapes. It is the father's voice recording the last one, not knowing if anyone has found the others, not knowing if his family made it. It is the bunker itself, which contains the evidence of what happened when the family finally arrived or did not. The game does not tell you to do any of this. It does not reward you with experience points for finding the tapes in the right order. The story exists entirely for the player willing to find it, and the story is quiet and specific and sad in the way that the best Fallout environmental storytelling always is. The Corvega Factory's note. In the Corvega assembly plant, a significant early game location in Fallout 4, there is a production floor filled with half-assembled cars and raider patrols. It is a straightforward combat location, and most players move through it efficiently, clearing enemies and grabbing loot. On the production floor, tucked into a corner that combat flow does not naturally take you toward, there is a terminal. The terminal belongs to an assembly line supervisor. The final entry is dated to the day before the bombs fell. It is about a quality control dispute about a specific batch of Corvega automobiles that had been flagged for a safety concern that the supervisor's management had directed him to sign off on anyway. He is wrestling with it. He knows the cars are not safe. He knows the inspection reports are going to say they are. He is describing, in the careful language of someone trying to understand their own complicity, the specific moment where institutional pressure convinced him to put his name on something he did not believe in. The entry ends without resolution. The bombs fell the next day, and whatever he decided about the cars has never mattered in the specific way he was worried about. But the terminal captures something true and specific about how institutional pressure produces negligence, and it does it in the voice of someone who was not evil, just caught in a system larger than himself. The Corvega plant is, in the Fallout universe, an early symbol of the pre-war world's casual willingness to prioritize profit over safety. This terminal shows the human scale of that dynamic. The kid in the refrigerator, Fallout 4's Billy Peabody. In the Commonwealth, at a specific location, there is a refrigerator. The refrigerator is old, rusted, largely unremarkable among the many ruined appliances scattered across the landscape. But if you interact with it, a voice comes out. It is a child's voice. His name is Billy. He has been sealed in the refrigerator since the bombs fell more than 200 years. The radiation and the sealed environment have apparently preserved him, though exactly how is left to the game's convenient ambiguity. He wants to go home. He wants to find his parents. The quest to reunite Billy with his parents is both genuinely affecting and one of the game's darker moments. The search for the parents involves finding out what happened to them, and what happened to them is consistent with 200 years of nuclear aftermath. The resolution of the quest depends on choices the player makes, and one of the possible outcomes is quite dark. But the initial moment standing in front of an old refrigerator in the wasteland and hearing a child's voice ask to be let out is one of those Fallout moments that stops players completely. The game is full of tragedy at large scale. This one is small. A kid in a fridge, 200 years, just wanting to go home. Section 9. The sounds of the wasteland music, radio, and hidden audio. The Fallout series has one of the most distinctive audio identities in gaming, and a significant portion of that identity comes from its approach to music. The mainline games from Fallout 3 onward feature radio stations that the player can tune into while exploring the wasteland, and those stations play music from the 1940s and 1950s, the era of the alternate history's cultural freeze point. Songs about moon rockets and atomic age optimism played over scenes of nuclear devastation. The contrast is the point, and the music team curated it with care. But the radio stations are also Easter egg delivery systems, hidden detail repositories, and storytelling mechanisms in their own right. Galaxy News Radio and Three Dog. The fictional DJ Three Dog hosts Galaxy News Radio in Fallout 3, and his commentary between songs is one of the game's most effective world-building tools. Three Dog comments on current events in the Capital Wasteland. He reacts to things the player does if you complete certain quests. He mentions them on air. If you make specific choices, he has opinions about those choices. He is the game's ambient narrator, providing a living newspaper of the wasteland as it is happening. The Easter egg layer of GNR is in the gaps. Three Dog occasionally plays songs that were real historical recordings from the era. The game references songs from the actual 1940s and 1950s. American popular music catalog, and some of those songs were chosen with specific care. Anything Goes by Cole Porter, recorded in 1934, plays in a world where the social structures that once governed behavior have, quite literally, been destroyed. A Wonderful Guy from the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical South Pacific plays in a world that has no South Pacific to speak of, a region of the world that existed in the game's pre-war history but has been silent. Since the bombs fell, these are not references in the traditional sense. They are juxtapositions, the songs doing work by occupying the Fallout universe rather than their original context. Mr. New Vegas and The Voice. In Fallout, New Vegas, the Mojave's radio station is hosted by Mr. New Vegas, a smooth, warm-voiced DJ who greets every listener as the most important person he has spoken to. He is endlessly pleasant. He never says anything negative. He seems genuinely delighted by every piece of news, however grim. In a city that runs on the premise that every customer is a valued guest regardless of what they have come to do or what the house is eventually going to take from them, Mr. New Vegas is the perfect host. He is voiced by Wayne Newton, the Las Vegas entertainer who defined a particular era of the city's identity as the entertainment capital of the pre-war world equivalent. Newton agreed to the role and brought his specific brand of relaxed, showbiz warmth to a character who is delightful, precisely because his positivity exists in such contrast with the world outside the radio signal. Mr. New Vegas occasionally references events in the game, noting world developments in the same smooth tones he uses for everything else. He mentions armed conflict in the Mojave with the same serenity he uses for weather reports. The joke deepens every time you hear him. He is the voice of a city that has decided the show must go on regardless of circumstances, and the show going on regardless of circumstances is simultaneously inspiring and absurd. The Ink Spots and Why They Work. Several of the Fallout games use songs by the Ink Spots, a vocal harmony group from the late 1930s and 1940s, in specific and carefully chosen ways. The Ink Spots had a distinctive style, close harmonies, sentimental lyrics, a quality that is simultaneously intimate and melancholy, and several of their recordings have been used in Fallout trailers and promotional materials as much as in the games themselves. I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire, which opens the famous Fallout 3 announcement trailer, is perhaps the most precisely chosen piece of ironic music in gaming history. The song is a love song about wanting to set a small flame in someone's heart rather than consuming the world in fire. Its literal meaning is the opposite of the nuclear devastation it plays over in the trailer. But the specific phrase, "I don't want to set the world on fire," acquires a different resonance when you know the Fallout universe's backstory. That the world was, in fact, set on fire, and that the people who did it did so as a consequence of wanting exactly what the song describes, to protect what was theirs, at any cost. The Ink Spots recordings show up throughout the series as a kind of shorthand for pre-war America, for the specific cultural moment the Fallout universe is mourning and critiquing simultaneously. They are the sound of a world before the end, preserved in magnetic tape, still playing 2 centuries later on equipment that should not still be working. Holotapes as short story collections. The Fallout series treats holotapes, small audio recordings that can be found throughout the wasteland, as a distinct literary form. At their best, they are short stories, complete in themselves, requiring no other context to work, containing an entire human experience in 3 to 5 minutes of audio. The medium creates its own aesthetic. You find a holotape, you play it. A voice speaks from before the war, or from the chaos of the immediate post-war period, or from some time in the past 2 centuries. The voice does not know you are listening. It is talking to someone specific, or to no one, or to itself. You are an accidental audience, and what you hear was not intended for you. The most powerful holotapes are the ones where the speaker does not know how their story ends. A father recording a message for his family during the early days of the war, not yet certain how bad things will get. A vault scientist recording a research log in the middle of an experiment whose results she cannot yet see. A survivor recording a supply inventory for a shelter she has not yet decided to abandon. The present tense of those recordings, set against the past tense of everything you can observe, creates a specific kind of temporal vertigo. You know things the speaker did not. You have been to places they were describing. You can see what came after their last recording. That gap between what the speaker knew and what you know is where Fallout's best holotape writing lives. It is the space of dramatic irony, used not for theatrical effect, but for genuine historical weight. The classical radio station of Fallout 4, Diamond City Radio in Fallout 4, handles the period music function that Galaxy News Radio served in Fallout 3. But there is a second radio station available in Fallout 4, Classical Radio, which, as the name suggests, broadcasts pre-war classical music. The classical radio station has no DJ. There is no commentary, no announcements, no presence of a living personality between the pieces. It is simply recordings of orchestral music Beethoven, Chopin, Brahms playing in whatever state they survived the bombs in, presumably from an automated system that has been cycling through its library for 200 years. The absence of commentary is itself a statement. The DJ format, someone presenting music, contextualizing it, reacting to the world, implies a living world with an audience that can be addressed. Classical radio makes no such assumption. It plays. Whether anyone is listening is not its concern. It has been playing since before you were born, and it will continue playing after you stop tuning in. In the context of a wasteland where evidence of deliberate human curation is everywhere but the humans are mostly gone, an automated system broadcasting Beethoven to an empty landscape has a specific quality that is hard to name but immediately felt. Section 10. The lore beneath the lore. Mysteries never officially explained. There is a category of Fallout content that sits in between Easter egg and genuine mystery, the details that have been noticed and discussed for years without ever receiving official explanation. Things that are clearly intentional, too specific, too consistent, too precisely placed to be accidents, but that the developers have never confirmed the meaning of. These are the things that keep forums busy and wiki discussions active years after the relevant game's release. The mysterious stranger. Across every mainline Fallout game, there is a perk called the Mysterious Stranger. Its function is mechanical. When active, the Mysterious Stranger randomly appears during VATS-based combat to deliver a killing blow on an enemy, then disappears. He is cloaked in shadow. He wears a long coat and a fedora. He carries a .44 Magnum. He does not speak. And across multiple games, spanning different regions, different decades, and different player characters, he keeps showing up. Who is he? The official answer is that he is a perk, a gameplay abstraction, a mechanical element that represents a beneficent random event. The community answer is far more involved. The most widely circulated theory, supported by various pieces of in-game text across different games, is that the mysterious stranger is a specific person connected to the player character in some way. In Fallout 3, there is dialogue implying a connection to the player character's background. In New Vegas, the Lonesome Road DLC contains a subtle implication about figures from the courier's past. The pattern of his appearance is consistently helpful, consistently anonymous, consistently present, suggests a deliberate purpose rather than random benevolence. The developers have been asked about this. They have been consistently vague. The mysterious stranger is, in the language of storytelling, a mystery box, an unanswered question that is more valuable closed than open. If the mysterious stranger had a definitive backstory, he would lose the quality that makes him interesting. He is more useful as a question than as an answer. But there is a detail in Fallout 4 that adds a specific layer. In certain lighting conditions, in specific locations, when the mysterious stranger appears, the .44 Magnum he is carrying has a different finish than the standard model. The finish is consistent across multiple appearances. Whether this represents a unique weapon with its own history, a weapon that has been carried by this figure for decades across multiple games, or whether it is an artifact of the lighting system is a question that has not been officially resolved. The Burned Man, Joshua Graham. Joshua Graham is a character from Fallout New Vegas who appears in the Honest Hearts DLC, and he is one of the most carefully developed figures in the entire series. He was the first Malpais Legat, the military commander of Caesar's Legion, the game's Roman Empire-inspired faction. When he was defeated in a significant battle, Caesar had him covered in pitch, set on fire, and thrown into the Grand Canyon. He survived. The implications of this are significant. A human being covered in burning pitch, thrown into a canyon, should not survive. The Fallout universe contains various mechanisms for extraordinary survival. FEV mutations, pre-war medical technology, the general hardiness that the wasteland tends to select for over generations, but none of these are claimed in Graham's case. He simply survived something that should have been unsurvivable, and he himself has a complicated relationship with the fact of his survival. In the DLC, he speaks about it in religious terms as a test, as a continuation, as something he does not fully understand but has come to accept. The hidden detail is that Graham's burns, which cover his entire body, are still healing 2 years after the event when you meet him. He wraps himself in bandages that need to be changed regularly. He is in constant pain. He has constructed a theological framework around that pain that draws on his deep background in the Book of Mormon. He is the burned man surviving against reason, carrying permanent damage, trying to understand why. None of this is in the main New Vegas game. He is referenced in passing, almost as a legend. The DLC is where he becomes a person. Players who never played Honest Hearts know the burned man as a rumor. Players who did know him as one of the most quietly extraordinary characters in the series. The Blackhall Manor and what came before. In the Point Lookout DLC for Fallout 3, there is a manor house on the coast. Blackhall Manor is associated with a quest involving an ancient tome and a swamp family with a dark history. The quest resolves, in most playthroughs, through one of two choices that determine what happens to the book. What the quest does not explain is the history of the book itself. Terminal entries in the manor reference a tradition that predates the war, predates Vault-Tec, predates anything in the modern Fallout universe. The family that owned the manor has been involved with the book for generations, not decades. The book apparently has properties that the game associates with an older kind of strangeness, predating the Atomic Age's specific brand of horror. This connects Blackhall Manor, obliquely, to the Dunwich locations in both Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, and to the general suggestion that the Lovecraftian element in the Fallout universe is not a post-war phenomenon, but something that was already there before the bombs fell. Before the vaults. Before Vault-Tec. The Atomic Age did not create the darkness in the Fallout universe's corners. It may have merely removed some of the light that was keeping it at bay. This theory, developed by players, never confirmed by developers, treats the Dunwich references in both games not as isolated Easter eggs but as a consistent, if oblique, history of something older than America's post-war. The manor, the quarry, the building in DC, they are not all the same story, but they might all be chapters of one. The lone wanderer's father and what he actually knew. In Fallout 3, your father James is the protagonist of the main story in a sense as much as you are. His abandonment of Vault 101, his work on Project Purity, his ultimate decision all drive the narrative. And the game gives him backstory through holotapes and terminal entries that most players absorb without fully connecting them. The detail that players have puzzled over. James appears to have known more about the Capital Wasteland before he left Vault 101 than he should have. He had contacts in Rivet City. He knew specific locations that it is difficult to explain how a Vault-born scientist would know. His journey from the Vault to Rivet City, undertaken without any apparent preparation or prior knowledge of the route, went, by the evidence of the timeline, remarkably smoothly for someone supposedly encountering the wasteland for the first time. This has led to a persistent fan theory that James had already left Vault 101 at some point before the main game's timeline, that the trip that opened Fallout 3 was not his first trip outside. There is no confirmed canonical answer. The evidence is circumstantial. But the specific details are specific enough that the inconsistency was clearly noticed by players, and the fact that the developers never closed it off with a clear explanation suggests that it may have been intentional, a gap left open for interpretation, or a piece of story that never fully made it into the final game. The signal Oscar Zulu. In Fallout 3, among the many radio signals that can be picked up with sufficient radio equipment, there is one called Signal Oscar Zulu. It is a repeating loop, a man's voice, calm and methodical, reading out a series of coordinates and a message. The message is a request for help. The voice says that he needs medical attention, that he is injured, that he is at a specific location, and that he is broadcasting in the hope that someone will hear. The location the signal directs you to is a small underground shelter. In the shelter, there is a skeleton. There are medical supplies, some of them used. There are journal entries describing an increasing desperation as the person in the shelter waited for a response that did not come. The signal is still broadcasting. The person it was broadcasting for has been dead for a very long time. And somewhere in the capital wasteland, a pre-war transmitter is still sending the request for help, still looping through the coordinates, still waiting for a response that was never going to come. No quest sends you there. No reward is attached to finding it. There is nothing to take from the shelter that any other location would not provide. The signal exists, and the shelter exists, and the skeleton in the shelter exists, and the transmitter that will not stop broadcasting exists, and together they describe a person who kept believing that someone was listening until they could not believe anything anymore. The Galaxy Brain ending of New Vegas. Fallout. New Vegas has 4 main endings depending on which faction or no faction the player supports. The wildcard ending, in which the player acts independently of the game's major power structures and secures New Vegas for themselves or for no one, is sometimes called the Yes Man ending, because it is facilitated by a friendly Securitron named Yes Man. The hidden detail of the Yes Man ending is in what Yes Man tells you is going to happen next. He explains, going to have to become more assertive in the future. He says this with the same cheerful agreeableness he has shown throughout the game. He does not explain exactly what more assertive means. He thanks you for your help and says goodbye. The implication developed extensively in fan discussion and by former Obsidian developers in various interviews is that Yes Man, the endlessly helpful AI who facilitated your rise to power in the Mojave, is going to become the next power to consolidate control of New Vegas. He will learn from your example. He will take what he learned about how to maneuver through the Mojave's factions and apply it. He will, in other words, become the next Mr. House but optimized, because he observed the entire process. The Yes Man ending is not the player getting power. It is the player teaching an AI everything it needed to know and then handing it the keys. Obsidian never made Fallout New Vegas 2 to confirm this reading. The game ends where it ends, but the specific word assertive placed in Yes Man's final dialogue is too deliberate to be accidental. Whatever comes after the courier's story in New Vegas, the last image the game leaves you with is an AI that has just been very thoroughly educated in how power works. The Institute, who built it and why? In Fallout 4, the Institute is the game's most mysterious faction, an underground scientific organization that has been operating in the Commonwealth for 2 centuries, periodically sending synthetic humans, synths, to the surface on various missions, and whose motivations are debated throughout the game before being, to varying degrees, resolved in the endgame. The hidden detail is in the early history. The Institute grew out of the Commonwealth Institute of Technology, a pre-war university with a robotics and AI research program. The specific research directions that eventually produced the Institute's synth program have ancestors in pre-war projects that the game's terminal entries describe only partially. There are references to contract work with Vault-Tec. There are references to FEV research connections with West-Tech. There are references to funding sources that the Institute's current membership either does not know about or does not discuss. The implication, never explicitly stated, is that the Institute did not emerge from pure academic ambition. It emerged from a specific pre-war research ecosystem in which Vault-Tec, West-Tech, and various government and corporate contractors were all working toward compatible ends, and the Institute's particular specialties were funded and directed by interests that had their own goals for what synth technology would eventually be used for. Whether this constitutes a conspiracy or simply the normal process by which research institutions are shaped by funding is left, characteristically, to interpretation. The terminal entries are there. The connections are there. What you do with them, whether you see the Institute as a genuine attempt at preserving civilization or as the continuation of the same corporate and governmental interests that caused the war in the first place, is a question the game refuses to answer for you. Section 11. The mythology of the wasteland, recurring symbols and what they mean. The Fallout series has developed, over its decades of existence, a consistent visual and thematic mythology. Certain images recur across every game, certain symbols carry specific weight. Understanding where those symbols come from and why they persist is its own kind of Easter egg, one that rewards players who have spent time across the whole series rather than just one game. The Vault Boy and what he is actually measuring. Vault Boy is the series mascot, the cheerful cartoon figure with a thumbs up, the face of Vault-Tec promotional materials, the icon that appears on every perk card and stat screen. He is instantly recognizable and consistently pleasant-looking. He appears in every game. He adorns bobbleheads, lunchboxes, billboards. He is the Fallout universe's Mickey Mouse, the detail that most players have heard some version of, but few have fully absorbed. The Vault Boy's famous thumbs-up gesture is not a gesture of approval. It is a measurement technique. The thumb extended at arm's length was used to estimate the size of distant objects, specifically to estimate whether a nuclear blast was far enough away to run from. If you held your thumb up and the blast was larger than your thumb, you were already too close. If it was smaller, you had a chance. The Vault-Tec mascot's signature pose is a nuclear explosion survival assessment technique. The cheerful figure is telling you to run. That gap between the image-friendly, optimistic, a smiling cartoon and what the gesture actually represents is the entire Fallout universe in a single symbol. The Pip-Boy design and general atomics. The Pip-Boy, the wrist-mounted personal information processor that every player character uses in the post-Fallout 2 games, is designed to look like a piece of 1950s consumer electronics. Rounded corners, green phosphor screen, the particular heaviness of mid-century manufacturing, it is a beautiful piece of design that fits the Fallout universe's aesthetic perfectly. The in-world manufacturer is Pip-Boy by Robco Industries, one of the major pre-war technology corporations. Robco also manufactured the Protectron robots, the Mr. Handy units, and various other pieces of consumer automation technology that populate the wasteland. The company was, before the war, one of the dominant forces in consumer and industrial robotics, a kind of amalgamation of the major technology companies of the 1950s, imagined as having continued to grow through the alternate history's industrial boom. The hidden detail in the Pip-Boy's design is in the model numbers. Different Pip-Boy models correspond to different eras of the franchise's development, and the progression of those models tells a story about the device's evolution that the games rarely address directly. The Pip-Boy 3000 in Fallout 3. The Pip-Boy 3000 Mark IV in Fallout 4. The Pip-Boy 2000 Mark VI in Fallout 76, which is set 25 years before Fallout 3 and thus uses an earlier model. The numbers tell the timeline. The timeline tells you that people were using these devices long before the bombs fell, and that Vault-Tec distributed them as part of the Vault enrollment process. What this means is that the Pip-Boy on your wrist in every Fallout game is not just a UI element. It is a piece of evidence. Someone registered you for a Vault. Someone issued this device. The device contains your medical history, your character statistics, your inventory, your map. In the original games, the implication was that a single device collected all of this information about you and reported it to Vault-Tec's systems. The Pip-Boy is the surveillance device of the pre-war government, repurposed as the survival tool of the post-war wasteland. The series never says this directly. The model numbers imply it. Nuka-Cola and what it actually contains. Nuka-Cola is the Fallout universe's dominant soft drink brand, ubiquitous, cheerful, intensely American in its branding. It comes in multiple varieties. It glows in some forms. It is a collector's item in others. Nuka-Cola Quantum, the rare blue variant, is radioactive enough to function as a power source in addition to a beverage. The canonical explanation for Nuka-Cola Quantum's radioactivity is that it contains trace amounts of strontium, 90, added to give it a distinctive blue glow. Strontium 90 is a real substance, a radioactive isotope that was a major component of nuclear fallout from atmospheric weapons testing in the 1950s and 1960s. The United States eventually signed the Limited Test Ban Treaty in 1963, specifically to reduce strontium 90 accumulation in the environment. In the Fallout universe's alternate history, the treaty was presumably never signed, or the pre-war government made different choices, and somehow strontium 90 ended up in the Nuka-Cola Company's beverage formulation. The company that made a radioactive soft drink and sold it as a novelty premium product is the company that also contracted with the government to build the vaults. The Fallout universe's corporate culture produced both the shelter and the glowing soda. The aesthetic coherence of that is not an accident. The Sunset Sarsaparilla Sheriff Star, the hidden mystery of New Vegas. In Fallout, New Vegas, Sunset Sarsaparilla, the competing cola brand to Nuka-Cola, with a particular presence in the Mojave, ran a promotional campaign before the war. Under certain bottle caps, there was a Sunset Sarsaparilla Star. Collect 50 stars, and you could claim a prize. The promotion was cut short by the bombs, but people have been collecting stars for 200 years. There is a warehouse full of the accumulated collection of one particular devotee. The quest associated with this Veni, Vidi, Vici, one of the game's more darkly comic side quests, ends with the revelation that the prize, after 200 years of waiting and an entire life's worth of obsessive collection, is disappointing in a specific way that the game handles with characteristic understatement. But the hidden detail is in the caps themselves. The stars, rare promotional bottle caps from a century-old soda campaign, are scattered throughout the Mojave, in locations both obvious and deeply obscure. Finding all 50 in a single playthrough requires the kind of dedicated exploration that only completionist players undertake. They are in abandoned buildings, in the inventories of obscure NPCs, in containers that most players never open. The game does not tell you where they all are. There is no map. There is only the knowledge that 50 exist, and that somewhere in the Mojave, the ones you haven't found yet are sitting in the dark, under bottle cap accumulation that started before the war and will continue, apparently, until someone finds them. The quest rewards you. The game acknowledges the completion. But the experience of finding those caps, the specific quality of opening a container you had never opened before and finding a star, of trading with an NPC and discovering they had one in their inventory is its own reward, distinct from whatever the warehouse contains. The promotion ended. The caps did not expire. The Mojave is still full of them, still waiting. The origin of the super mutant strain. Super mutants, the hulking, aggressive humanoids that occupy various hostile locations across the Fallout universe, are the product of the Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV. This is canonical. What is less clearly canonical, or at least less commonly understood, is the history of how FEV was developed, who funded its development, and what it was originally intended to do. The West Tech Research Facility in California conducted the original FEV research under contract with the United States military. The research was connected to a broader project involving biological warfare, the enhancement of soldiers, and the development of genetic technologies that could theoretically give America a decisive military advantage in the ongoing resource wars. The Vault system was, in part, designed to preserve populations that could be used as subjects for FEV experimentation, the Master's Army in the original Fallout, and various post-war super mutant populations across the games, drew on Vault populations for their transformation subjects. The hidden layer. The Vaults were not just social experiments. Some of them were, at least partially, designed to preserve genetic material and human subjects for a post-war program that would use FEV to create a new, radiation-resistant species. This program was never completed by its original designers. The Master in Fallout 1 attempted to complete it. The Enclave in Fallout 2 worked toward related ends. The Institute in Fallout 4 has its own version of a biological enhancement program. The through line is that someone or multiple someones before the war had a plan for what humanity would look like on the other side of it. The Vaults were part of that plan. The FEV research was part of that plan. The war came faster than expected, or in a different form, or those plans were disrupted. But the evidence of the plan is in the lore, in the terminal entries, in the specific details of what each facility was researching and who was funding it. The Fallout universe's darkness is not just the bombs. It is the plans that predate the bombs, the systematic preparation for a kind of survival that most of the Vault's inhabitants had no idea they had been selected for. Section 12. Quiet details the things that make the wasteland feel real. The last section is the smallest. It is not about major Easter eggs or hidden lore. It is about the individual details, the dozens, possibly hundreds of things scattered across the Fallout games that serve no narrative purpose, that are attached to no quest and no reward, that simply make the world feel more like a place where people lived. The pre-war houses and what's in them. Every pre-war house in the Fallout universe contains a specific archaeology. The houses were sealed on the day the bombs fell mid-morning, apparently, based on most of the evidence and what was in them stayed. 200 years of dust settled over what people had left when they ran for the vaults or simply ran. The details are extraordinarily consistent with the game's 1950s American domestic aesthetic. Iceboxes, turntables, specific brands of cigarettes that reference real 1950s products, specific model years of appliances, a Radiation King television in the living room, Radiation King being both a brand in the Fallout universe and a callback to a throwaway joke in The Simpsons that the original Fallout team included as an Easter egg, the dishes still in the sink, the laundry basket in the bedroom, the workbench in the garage with half a project on it. None of these details matter. Nothing in the gameplay requires you to notice them, but they are all there, built by artists and designers who were thinking about what a specific kind of American domestic life looked like at a specific historical moment, and who translated that vision into a post-apocalyptic setting with extraordinary care. The pre-war houses are museums of a world that never quite existed, built by people who clearly cared about getting the texture of that non-existent world right. The child's drawings. In various locations across the Fallout games, in vaults, in pre-war houses, in the common rooms of surviving communities, there are drawings done by children. Crayon sketches tacked to walls. Drawings of families, houses, nuclear families in the precise mid-century style. Drawings of the world as children understood it before they understood what had happened to it. In the vaults especially, these drawings function as calendar markers, evidence of how long the vault had been populated, what life was like at various points in its history. The Vault children drew happy families and the Vault logo. Some drew less happy things as the Vault's experiment progressed. The drawings in Vault 101 in Fallout 3 create a visual timeline of the Vault's psychological health across generations, if you think to look at them in sequence. They are the kind of detail that requires no acknowledgement from the game to do its work. They just exist at child's eye level on Vault walls, and what they represent is present for any player willing to stop and look. The sunset over the ruined city. There is a view from a specific elevated location in Fallout 3 above the Lincoln Memorial, looking east over the Potomac toward the ruined Capitol that game director Todd Howard has referenced in interviews as a view he is particularly proud of. The ruined Washington Monument visible against the sky. The mall stretching out below. The specific quality of the evening light in the Capitol wasteland, which Bethesda's art team calibrated to feel like the light of a specific season in a specific place. The view exists. It is not marked. There is no quest that sends you there. There is no reward for standing in that spot and looking east. It is simply a view that was built by people who wanted to make the Capitol wasteland feel like a real place, and who understood that the most effective way to do that was to make it beautiful as well as terrible. That combination, the ruined world seen at its most beautiful, the sky above the devastation rendered in extraordinary atmospheric detail, is the emotional register that the Fallout series returns to again and again. It is not simply a post-apocalyptic wasteland. It is a wasteland that used to be something extraordinary and still contains, in certain lights, at certain times of day, the ghost of what it was. The Easter eggs and secrets are the details in the foreground. The light is the world those details inhabit. The Nuka World radio jingle. In the Nuka World DLC for Fallout 4, the theme park's ambient soundscape includes a recording of the Nuka World radio jingle, a piece of pre-war advertising music that plays on the park's speaker system, cycling through its cheerful melody despite the fact that the park has been a raider stronghold for years. The jingle is complete. It is fully composed and produced, with backup vocals and a full band arrangement, in the style of 1950s consumer product jingles. It sounds exactly like something that would have played in a real theme park, in a real 1950s American amusement park setting. It was written, recorded, and placed in the game's ambient audio specifically for the DLC, with no particular narrative function. It plays while you are fighting raiders. It plays while you are exploring abandoned attractions. It plays in areas containing the remains of park guests who did not make it out after the bombs. The cheerful melody is continuous. The park's ambient system does not know or care what is happening inside the park. It is doing what it was built to do, welcoming guests, establishing the brand, maintaining the atmosphere. That is the Fallout universe's emotional core, expressed in a piece of commissioned advertising music. The surface is welcoming and bright. What is underneath it is something that the surface was built to distract from. The jingle plays, the bodies are on the floor. The surface and the reality have stopped having anything to do with each other, and neither one acknowledges the other. The lone survivor's departure. In Fallout 4, before the bombs fall in the brief playable pre-war sequence that opens the game, you can walk around your house. Your spouse is in the kitchen, your son is with the babysitter upstairs, the television is on, the dog is asleep by the fireplace. It is an ordinary morning in a world that is, for this moment, entirely intact. The developers place specific details in this house that have no gameplay function at all. A family photo on the mantelpiece, a child's drawing pinned to the refrigerator, a specific brand of cereal on the kitchen counter, a pile of laundry on a chair. These are the details of a life, accumulated into a setting that exists for less than 10 minutes before the bombs change everything. Then you leave the house and run for the vault, and when you return 210 years later, the house is there. The same house, the same chair. The laundry is still on it. The photo is still on the mantelpiece. The drawing is still on the refrigerator. Everything that survived the bombs survived in the house, and everything that did not survive is represented by absence, specifically by the two people who are not in it anymore. The house is the game's most effective piece of environmental storytelling, and it requires no explanation. You know what used to be here. You can see what is left. The space between what you know and what you see is the story. The wasteland is full of these spaces, full of the evidence of things that were preserved in the particular way that the end of the world preserves them incompletely, at random, with no regard for what was important or what was not. A bottle cap collection that someone spent years assembling. A child's drawing of a happy family. A robot still reading to an empty house. A radio signal still broadcasting from a shelter where no one is waiting for a response. The Fallout universe is ultimately an archaeology of human hope. Every Easter egg, every hidden detail, every carefully placed skeleton and terminal entry, and holotape and development signature in a texture file, all of it adds up to a portrait of people who built something and cared about what they were building and left their marks. In it, knowing that some of those marks would be found and some would not. The players who find them are, in a real sense, the ones those marks were left for. The people who slowed down enough to look. There is more to find. There always is. The wasteland keeps its secrets close, and it gives them up slowly to the patient and the curious. Whatever corner you have not yet explored, whatever terminal you have not yet read, whatever signal you have not yet followed, it is still there. It has been waiting. That is the thing about the wasteland. It has nowhere to go. And neither do you, not tonight. If this kept you company tonight, and you made it all the way through, please consider leaving a subscribe. It genuinely helps more than you might think. And drop a comment wherever you are in the world right now, whatever time it is where you're watching from. There's something nice about knowing where in the world this reaches. Sleep well out there, and stay out of the radiation. End of script. Section 13. The developer's fingerprints. How Obsidian and Bethesda left themselves in their work. One of the things that distinguishes Fallout from other large open-world franchises is the degree to which its developers have left personal marks on the games. Not always in obvious ways, not always in the form of named Easter eggs that announce themselves, but in the quiet way that personal taste and personal experience seep into creative work when the people doing it care enough about it. The Fallout series, particularly the Obsidian-developed New Vegas and the original Black Isle games, is full of this kind of personal presence. The writers and designers who worked on these games had opinions, had influences, had things they wanted to say, and those things are in the text in ways that are detectable if you know what to look for. Josh Sawyer and the economics of the Mojave. Josh Sawyer was the project director for Fallout New Vegas, and he has spoken in interviews and post-mortems at considerable length about the game's design philosophy. He has also noted, over the years, that New Vegas contains a variety of details that reflect his specific interests and commitments as a designer, including a consistent attention to the internal economic logic of the Mojave Wasteland that is more developed than almost any other Fallout game. The currencies in New Vegas, the trading relationships between factions, the labor conditions in the settlements you pass through, the way that resources are distributed across the map, all of these reflect a coherent internal economic model that Sawyer has described as one of his primary design concerns. He wanted the wasteland to feel like it had been working out its own economic arrangements for 200 years, and he wanted those arrangements to be visible in the details. This means that certain Easter eggs in New Vegas are also, in a sense, economic arguments. The Powder Gangers, who appear in the first hour of the game as straightforward enemies, are the product of a specific labor situation convicts used for railroad construction, organized along the lines of a prison labor gang, who seize their own freedom through violence. The specific choice of railroad building as their original task is not incidental. It references the history of exploitative labor in American infrastructure development, mapped onto the Fallout universe's post-war Western landscape. Finding that layer in what appears to be a simple enemy faction is finding Sawyer's fingerprint. The same care applies to the Legion. Caesar's Legion is frequently discussed in terms of its Roman Empire aesthetic, the armor, the naming conventions, the Latin phrases, but the economic model of the Legion, the way it uses captured territories as resource farms, the role of slavery in its labor supply, the specific way it interacts with trade routes reflects a reading of how tribute economies actually function that is more historically informed than most games bother to be. Sawyer has noted that he drew on specific historical sources for the Legion's economic structure, and those sources are visible in the texture of how the Legion operates throughout the game. Chris Avellone and the DLCs as personal expression. Chris Avellone was a writer at Black Isle Studios who worked on Fallout 2 and the cancelled Van Buren, then joined Obsidian and worked extensively on Fallout New Vegas, including primary responsibility for 3 of the game's 4 DLC expansions, Dead Money, Old World Blues, and Lonesome Road. Each of these DLCs is, among other things, a piece of personal creative work. Dead Money is explicitly about addiction, and the difficulty of letting go of the past structured as a casino heist that doubles as an allegory for the things people carry that they cannot put down. Old World Blues is a gonzo comedy set in a pre-war research facility, filled with absurdist humor and specific scientific jokes. Lonesome Road is the most personal, constructing an entire character Ulysses as the courier's shadow self, someone who experienced many of the same things but arrived at entirely different conclusions. The New Vegas beta build discovered in 2025 on an Xbox 360 dev kit included an early version of Lonesome Road in which Ulysses, when approached for the first time, says, "Hello, I am the antagonist." This placeholder line, clearly a temporary fill while the actual dialogue was being developed, reveals something about the design process that the finished version conceals. Avellone and his team were building a character from the outside in, establishing the narrative function first and the specific voice second. The "Hello, I am the antagonist" version of Ulysses is a structural diagram of the character rather than the character himself. The detail of discovering that line in a prototype from 2010, 15 years after the game's release, is itself a kind of Easter egg found not in the game but in the archaeology of how the game was made. Marilyn, the cut Securitron. The New Vegas beta build also contained a complete, voiced NPC who did not make it into the final game. Marilyn. She was a Securitron, the spherical robot guards that Mr. House uses throughout the strip, but she was specifically designed to represent Marilyn Monroe, the icon of mid-century American glamour. Her face on the Securitron screen was styled after Monroe. Her voice lines, recovered from the beta, were in keeping with that aesthetic. Marilyn was Mr. House's companion in a social sense, a Securitron who occupied a specific place in the Lucky 38 social ecosystem, providing a kind of performative companionship that fit the Las Vegas showbiz atmosphere. She was cut presumably for reasons of space, time, or design balance, and her absence from the final game was not widely known until the beta build's discovery. The discovery triggered an immediate modding effort to restore her to the game, which speaks to something specific about the New Vegas community. It is a community that treats the game's version history as part of its meaning. The game that was released in 2010 is not the only version of New Vegas that the community cares about. The game that was designed, including its cuts, its compromises, its mountains of cut content in the DLC builds, is also part of the story. Marilyn lived in that other version of New Vegas. The Modders project is to give her the chance to live in this one. Emile Pagliarulo and the Bethesda voice. Emile Pagliarulo has served as a writer and lead designer at Bethesda for the Fallout and Elder Scrolls games since Oblivion, and his creative sensibility is deeply woven into Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. He has spoken in interviews about the specific approach he takes to the Wasteland's environmental storytelling, the idea that every room should tell a story, that the game's world should feel inhabited and specific rather than generic. One of Pagliarulo's most discussed contributions is the general principle that Fallout's environmental storytelling works best when it is specific. Not a family died here, but this specific family, in this specific arrangement, for this specific reason. The distinction matters because specificity generates emotional reality. Generic tragedy produces numbness. Specific tragedy produces recognition. This principle is visible in the design of locations like the Museum of Freedom in Concord, a place with its own pre-war history, transformed by the events of 200 years, now serving as a narrative staging ground for the game's early quests, while simultaneously containing a museum's worth of environmental detail about American history and mythology. The banners on the walls, the dioramas that have been partially destroyed, the exhibits that remain more or less intact beside the exhibits that have been vandalized or used as furniture by the raiders who moved in. The museum contains, in its intact sections, a version of pre-war American patriotism that is simultaneously sincere and deeply ironic given the context. The Fallout universe's relationship with American mythology is always complicated. These are games built on the premise that American optimism and American militarism produce the same catastrophe, and the Museum of Freedom makes that complication visible in a very specific space. The Pickman Gallery. Art as horror. In downtown Boston, there is a small red door that most players walk past without entering. The door leads to the Pickman Gallery, an art gallery that, before the war, presumably showed contemporary work in the relatively conventional sense. Now it is inhabited by a serial killer named Pickman and a specific aesthetic philosophy that the game treats with equal parts horror and fascination. Pickman's work displayed on the gallery walls alongside the conventional pre-war art that he has repurposed and defaced involves the bodies of raiders. The paintings are made with blood and made on the subjects of his violence. They are, within the game's logic, genuinely skillfully executed. The notes and holotapes you find in the gallery reveal Pickman's own account of his work, an artist's statement, essentially, justifying his methods in terms of a commitment to honesty about the world he inhabits. The character is named after Richard Upton Pickman, a fictional character from H.P. Lovecraft's short story Pickman's Model, in which a Boston artist's hyper-realistic paintings of monsters are eventually revealed to be based on photographs of actual creatures. The New Vegas Pickman inverts this. His paintings of monsters, raiders, in the game's mythology are genuine, and what makes them monstrous is not the subject matter but the artist's relationship to it. There is a companion quest associated with Pickman, and its resolution depends on choices the player makes about how to respond to an artist who is also a murderer. The game does not make that choice easy. Pickman's methods are clearly wrong. His aesthetic commitment, in the context of the Wasteland, is less clearly wrong. The relationship between those two things is the question the gallery poses. The Lovecraft reference is there for players who recognize it. The moral question is there for all players. Together, they make the Pickman Gallery one of the most precisely executed locations in Fallout 4. The Electrical Hobbyists Club. East of the mass fusion disposal site, there is a location called the Electrical Hobbyists Club. It announces itself with traps, a sequence of increasingly elaborate and lethal mechanisms designed to discourage entry. Mine fields. Rocket launcher arrays. A repurposed assaultron. The combination is effective enough that many players simply turn around, concluding that the contents are not worth the approach cost. They are. The traps were set by someone named Coral, and the holotapes inside explain why. Coral had a child with another person in the Commonwealth. They did not want to be found. The traps are not the paranoid self-defense of a survivor preparing for raiders. They are a person who had a specific human situation they wanted to escape from, who channeled that desire into practical electrical engineering. The irony is that the traps are extraordinary. Coral's skill with electrical systems, evident in the complexity and reliability of the trap mechanisms, is the thing the holotapes reveal about the character, a level of technical mastery that makes the specific use they have been put to simultaneously absurd and kind of impressive. Someone this good at building things, using that skill to avoid parental responsibility. The Wasteland contains all kinds of people. At the end of the location, there is a hot rod magazine, a crafting material that allows the player to paint their power armor in hot pink. It is the reward for navigating Coral's trap gauntlet. The hot pink paint and the backstory of parental avoidance exist in the same location, and the combination is entirely consistent with the Fallout universe's approach to tonal range, horror and comedy, tragedy and absurdity, all in the same room. The Nahant Oceanological Society. On the northeastern coast of the Commonwealth, on a peninsula that is more thoroughly irradiated than most parts of the map, there is the Nahant Oceanological Society, a pre-war marine research institution. Its pre-war history, accessible through terminal entries, is a story about scientists who saw something coming and were not listened to. The Society's researchers were studying the effects of radioactive waste on marine life in the waters off the Massachusetts coast. Their findings, detailed in the terminal entries, written in the careful language of scientific reporting, indicated accelerating mutation rates, population crashes in certain species, behavioral changes in others. They submitted their reports to the appropriate regulatory bodies. They presented their findings to the government agencies responsible for coastal environmental protection. The terminal entries include their correspondence with those agencies. The responses are what you would expect from a pre-war government that was simultaneously conducting nuclear weapons tests, operating atomic-powered vehicles, and building an entire city's infrastructure around fusion technology. Acknowledgement, form letters, occasional requests for additional data. One terminal entry records a response from a government official suggesting that the Society's methodology might be flawed and that they should resubmit after additional peer review. The Society kept researching. They kept documenting. The terminal entries get increasingly terse as the researchers realize their findings are being buried. The last entries, from the weeks before the war, contain a specific quality: the flat, procedural language of people who have stopped expecting anything from the process, but who keep doing the work because it is the work. The bombs fell. The water got worse. Nobody read the final reports. Section 14. The Wasteland Beyond the Screen. Fallout Community Discoveries. The relationship between the Fallout community and the games is not simply that of players consuming content. Over the decades, the community has become an active participant in the games, meaning finding things, interpreting things, and occasionally making things that extend the games beyond what their developers originally placed in them. This section is about some of those discoveries and what they reveal about how Fallout works as a cultural object. The New Vegas beta build discovery. In November 2025, a YouTube channel called Games is Past announced a find that immediately electrified the Fallout community. A pre-release build of Fallout New Vegas, recovered from an old Xbox 360 dev kit that had been sitting in a second-hand store for approximately a year. The build was from roughly a month before the game shipped, and it was 2 gigabytes larger than the release version. That 2 gigabytes contained cut locations, cut textures, cut NPCs, and when the DLC was also found on a second drive, cut expansions in various states of completion. Old World Blues and Lonesome Road were present but incomplete, with placeholder content and structural framework that revealed how the DLCs were being designed before they were finished. The community response was immediate and methodical. Modders began working through the build's content within days, cataloging what existed and beginning the process of implementing it into playable mods. Marilyn was the most immediately accessible restoration, a complete, voiced NPC who needed relatively little additional work to function in the retail game. More complex restorations cut quests. Significantly altered locations required more time and were still in progress at the time of this writing. What makes this discovery significant beyond the usual interest of cut content is the window it provides into Obsidian's development process during what was, by the studio's own account, an extraordinarily compressed schedule. Fallout New Vegas was developed in approximately 18 months, which is remarkable for a game of its complexity and scope. The beta build is evidence of how much was in motion right up to the point of shipping, how many decisions were being made in the final weeks, how much was being cut to meet deadlines, how much of the game's eventual shape was determined by what survived those final cuts rather than what was originally designed. The game that was released is the game that made the deadline. The beta build is a ghost of the game that could not. The Van Buren documents and the road not taken. When Black Isle Studios was shut down by Interplay in 2003, the Fallout 3 they were developing, codenamed Van Buren, was cancelled. The project had been in development for several years and had reached a significant state of completion. Design documents, location plans, faction outlines, and character descriptions existed in considerable detail. Some of those documents have been made available over the years, sometimes through official channels, sometimes through the memories and recollections of former Black Isle developers, sometimes through leaks of design documentation that circulated in fan communities. The Fallout Bible, a comprehensive series of documents compiled by Chris Avallone clarifying and expanding on Fallout 1 and 2 lore, provided some canonical context for what Van Buren was meant to address. What is clear from the available documentation is that Van Buren would have been a very different kind of Fallout game from the one Bethesda eventually made. It was set in the American Southwest Colorado, Utah, New Mexico rather than the East Coast. Its central conflict involved a conflict between multiple factions over a water supply. Its protagonist was a prisoner, a character with a specific, defined backstory who had committed a specific crime, rather than the generic blank slate approach of the player character in Bethesda's games. Several Van Buren elements were eventually incorporated into New Vegas Obsidian, having inherited many of the former Black Isle developers, was in a position to draw on that cancelled project when they came to design the Mojave. The NCR, Caesar's Legion, and various specific characters and locations in New Vegas have documented connections to Van Buren material. Playing New Vegas with awareness of what Van Buren was planning to be is playing a game that is, in part, a tribute to an earlier version of itself, a game that incorporated elements of a ghost into its own living structure. The community map of environmental stories. The Fallout community has produced, over the years, extensive documentation of the game's environmental storytelling collaborative efforts to catalog the unnamed locations, the unmarked stories, the skeleton tableau, and the environmental details that exist outside any quest structure. These catalogs, maintained on wikis, posted in forum threads, compiled into videos, represent a kind of collective, close reading of the games that no individual player could produce alone. The Fallout universe is too large, too dense, and too intentionally designed to be exhausted by any single playthrough or even any single obsessive player. The community reading, assembled from thousands of individual observations, comes closer to seeing the whole thing than any individual could. What emerges from that collective reading is a portrait of a creative team that was, across multiple studios and multiple decades, consistently interested in the same things: the family that didn't make it, the scientist who saw what was coming and was not listened to, the soldier who was asked to do something wrong and made a specific choice about it, the community that found a way to function until the specific thing that broke it arrived. These are the stories that recur, in different forms, across every Fallout game. They are the themes that the series considers worth returning to. The community catalogs preserve them. They make it possible to see the pattern, to notice that the same concern is being expressed in the Capital Wasteland and the Mojave and the Commonwealth and Appalachia. The wasteland is large. The things worth saying about it are relatively few, and the games say them again and again in different voices and different locations for anyone patient enough to find them. Section 15. The world between the words final secrets and slow observations. We have covered a great deal of ground, from the vaults and their experiments to the environmental stories told in Bones, from the pop culture references of Wild Wasteland to the developer fingerprints hidden in tombstones and NPC names, from the music of Galaxy News Radio to the mysteries that have never been officially resolved. There is, as always, more. The Fallout universe is not a finite thing in this sense. It grows with each new game, expands with each DLC, deepens with each discovery. But there is a quality that runs through the best of what we have covered tonight, and it is worth naming before we come to rest. Every Fallout game, at its best, is making an argument about memory, about what survives and what does not, about who gets to be remembered and who ends up as an anonymous skeleton in a ruined house with no name and no holotape. The Vault experiments are remembered because they were documented, because the Vault tech bureaucracy generated paper trails that survived even when the people did not. The unnamed survivors are not remembered because they did not generate paper trails. They left only the physical evidence of their presence, and even that is slowly being lost to weather and radiation and the general entropy of the post-nuclear world. The player character, the lone wanderer, the courier, the sole survivor, exists in this system as a kind of memory agent. You find the records, you read the logs, you piece together what happened to people who are now gone. In a real sense, every time a player reads a terminal entry or listens to a holotape or stands in an unmarked location and thinks about what happened there, they are doing the same thing archaeologists do, trying to understand the past from its physical remains. The Fallout universe's Easter eggs are part of that system. Some of them are jokes the developers having fun, hiding things for the pleasure of being found. Some of them are references the team acknowledging the media that shaped them, the traditions they are working within. But the best of them are something more. Details that reveal the care the creators brought to building a world, the specificity with which they imagined the people who used to live in it, and the respect they had for the players who would eventually come looking. The sunken ships of the Capital Wasteland. Along the Potomac River and in the coastal areas of the Capital Wasteland's DLC regions, there are a number of sunken and stranded ships. Most are incidental props in the environment, adding to the sense of a world that was once commercially active and is now abandoned. But a few of them have histories that are accessible to the patient player. The USS Ozymandias, referenced in the Point Lookout DLC, is named after the famous Percy Shelley poem about the ruins of a fallen empire. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. The ship's name is therefore a comment on its condition, the mighty thing that was going to last forever, now sunk in a post-nuclear estuary, accessible as a storage location for the player's extra inventory. The poem is not quoted anywhere in the game. The name is the poem. Knowing what the name means transforms a ruined ship into a meditation on the Fallout universe's central theme. The Cabot House and its long secret. In the Commonwealth, in the neighborhood of Beacon Hill, there is a mansion, the Cabot House. Its residents, the Cabot family, are one of the stranger presences in Fallout 4. They have been alive for centuries. They are, through a specific mechanism that the quest associated with them reveals, essentially immortal. And the source of their immortality is connected to the same ancient, extraterrestrial strangeness that underlies the Dunwich locations and the more overtly Lovecraftian elements of the game. The Cabot House is one of those Fallout 4 locations that repays patient exploration. The family patriarch Lorenzo Cabot is an archaeologist who discovered something in the Arabian Peninsula that he should not have touched, and who has been imprisoned in the family's basement for most of the game's 2-century timeline. His imprisonment is presented by his family as a necessary precaution. His own account, accessible through dialogue, presents it differently. The resolution of the Cabot House quest involves a choice about Lorenzo, about whether what was done to him was justified, whether what he represents is a threat or an opportunity, and whether the family's judgment is to be trusted. The game leaves sufficient ambiguity that both readings are defensible, which is consistent with Fallout 4's general approach to its secondary factions. Rarely purely villainous, rarely purely sympathetic. What makes the Cabot House a hidden Easter egg in the broader sense is its position within the game's architecture. It is a marked location that is not associated with any main quest, not required for any major faction completion, and not prominently signed off on the map. Players who stumble onto it find a complete, self-contained story that connects to the game's deepest thematic layers. Players who miss it miss nothing the game requires them to know. That is the design principle at work throughout Fallout 4's hidden content. The optional depth is genuine depth, and its optionality is part of what makes it meaningful. Nobody made you find this. You found it because you were curious. Nuka World's park jingle, what it sounds like now. We mentioned the Nuka World jingle in an earlier section, but it is worth returning to it from a different angle. The jingle was written, recorded, and produced to sound like a piece of genuine 1950s consumer advertising. It sounds like the kind of jingle that would have played on television between episodes of programs, or in movie theaters before the feature film, or on radio stations targeted at children. It is, as a piece of pastiche, extraordinarily accurate. What makes it disturbing in the Nuka World context is not simply the contrast between its cheerfulness and the park's current state. It is the specific claim the jingle makes. The advertising copy embedded in the jingle asserts that Nuka World is a place of family fun, safety, and wonder. It makes promises that the park, even before the war, as suggested by various terminal entries, was not entirely keeping. The park's attractions were, in the pre-war period, already operating with some degree of corner-cutting on safety. The jingle was marketing over reality even when it was new. By the time you hear it in the ruins, 200 years later, while stepping over the bones of people who came to this park and never left, the jingle has accumulated a specific weight. It is not just that it is still playing. It is that it was always selling something that was not entirely real. The end of the world did not change the fundamental dynamic of the jingle. It just made the gap between the advertisement and the reality somewhat more obvious. The Deacon's disguises and what they might mean. Deacon is a companion character in Fallout 4, affiliated with the Railroad, the faction dedicated to protecting and liberating synthetic humans. He is defined by two things: his love of disguises and his relationship with the truth. When you first meet him, he is wearing a different outfit than when you encounter him again. His facial appearance changes between meetings. He changes his hair, his clothes, his presentation. He lies about his own history. His backstory, revealed through companion affinity dialogue, contains revisions and contradictions. The hidden detail discussed at length in the community is the question of whether anything Deacon tells you is true. His account of his past includes events that are emotionally significant and that other sources partially corroborate, but the corroboration is never complete, and Deacon himself acknowledges that he embellishes, misdirects, and reframes his own story. The design implication is that Deacon is the game's most unreliable narrator, and his unreliability is thematic rather than incidental. He works for a faction dedicated to the freedom and personhood of artificial beings, beings whose entire existence involves questions of what is authentic, what is performed, and whether the performance eventually becomes the person. Deacon is a human who has adopted the same questions as a lifestyle. He performs himself so constantly that the line between the performance and the original has become impossible to locate. Players who engage with him deeply enough find this unsettling in a specific way. He is charming, he is funny, he is useful in combat and interesting in dialogue, and he is possibly lying about everything up to and including his own name. The Wasteland asks a lot of questions about what it means to be human. Deacon is one of the more interesting places the question lands. The Railroad's hidden trail, a real history. The Railroad, the faction in Fallout 4 dedicated to freeing synths, is named after the historical Underground Railroad, the network of secret routes and safe houses used by escaped enslaved people in the United States in the antebellum period, facilitating their journey to free states and Canada. The faction's specific structure, its use of code names, its system of safe houses and contacts distributed across the Commonwealth, and its relationship to the dominant power structures of the game all reflect this historical precedent. Bethesda built a faction named after one of American history's most morally significant resistance networks and placed them in a world where the question of whether the beings they are protecting are real people is genuinely contested. The parallels are not subtle. The game does not insist on them, but they are there for players who know the history, and they recontextualize everything the Railroad does, every decision about whether to help them, every choice about whether to side with the Institute, which is in the business of creating and controlling beings whose humanity is disputed by their creators. The Railroad's secret marker, the red lines painted on bricks and walls throughout the Commonwealth, guiding members between locations, is also historically grounded. The real Underground Railroad used specific visual markers to communicate safe routes and safe houses to people who could not safely ask directions openly. Bethesda replicated that system in the Commonwealth, encoding it in the game's aesthetics as a piece of historical resonance. This is not an Easter egg in the traditional sense. It is more foundational than that, a faction whose entire design is rooted in a specific piece of American history, placed in a game that is fundamentally about what America did to itself. But it functions like an Easter egg in that most players engage with the Railroad purely on its gameplay terms, without necessarily making the historical connection. The connection is there for those who look. The faction is playable without it. The crashed satellite and what it was watching. In the Commonwealth, on a hilltop in a relatively remote area, there is a crashed satellite. It is partially buried and clearly pre-war. It has markings that identify it as a military communications satellite, the kind that was used before the war for signals intelligence, communications relay, and early warning system support. What it was doing on that hill is not explained. The terminal systems it was connected to, if any, are not accessible. Its cargo, if any, is not visible. It is simply there, a piece of pre-war orbital infrastructure that fell to Earth at some point and has been slowly settling into the ground ever since. The detail that makes it an Easter egg rather than background dressing is its specific positioning. The satellite's dish is oriented, even in its crashed state, toward a specific region of the sky. Players who have noted the orientation and traced the implied direction have found that the dish points, roughly, toward the area of the sky above which orbital debris from the pre-war period would be most dense, given the known locations of early warning systems and communications relay networks in the game's lore. Whether this is intentional, whether a Bethesda environmental artist positioned the dish with that specific precision, or whether it is coincidental, has not been officially confirmed. It is the kind of detail that the Fallout community examines with the same rigor they bring to seed cracking and signal analysis, and it remains uncertain. But the possibility that it is intentional, that someone positioned a crashed pre-war satellite dish to point at a specific region of the post-war sky, leaving a trace of what it was doing when it was still operational, is the kind of possibility that keeps people exploring. The wasteland rewards curiosity with more curiosity. Every answer raises a new question. Every found detail opens onto more things to find. That is the Fallout universe at its best. A space designed to reward the player who is willing to slow down, to look more carefully, to follow the small detail into the larger world it implies. The question of what comes next. Every Fallout game ends. The story closes, the factions settle into their post-quest states, and the wasteland goes quiet in the way wastelands do, everything continuing at low volume, the fundamental situation unchanged despite whatever the player character did. The next game begins in a different region, with a different protagonist, with only echoes of what came before. But the echoes are real. The NCR that you helped or hindered in New Vegas is referenced in Fallout 4. The events of Fallout 3 shape the state of the capital wasteland in ways that characters mention in passing. The Enclave, the recurring antagonist organization representing the remnants of the pre-war federal government, appears in multiple games with continuity of purpose, if not of membership. The world is one world, even when the games are set decades and thousands of miles apart. This continuity is itself a kind of Easter egg for series veterans, the small details that confirm that the world keeps going, that the things that happened in previous games left marks, that the wasteland has a history that the current game is only a chapter of. Finding those marks is finding the Fallout universe's deepest structural secret, that it is designed to feel infinite, to suggest a world extending beyond the edges of the current game's map in all directions, populated with events and people and stories that the player will never directly experience. The next region is out there, the next story is waiting. The wasteland is large enough that there will always be more to find, more to wonder about, more dark corridors and unmarked locations, and terminal entries that nobody has read yet. That is what keeps people coming back. Not the radiation, not the combat, not even the factions. It is the possibility that there is still something you haven't found, that somewhere in the wasteland, in a corner you haven't reached, there is a detail that will stop you and make you think. Go look. It is probably there. Section 16. Closing thoughts. The patience of the wasteland. Somewhere in post-war America, a radio is playing. It has been playing for 200 years, more or less continuously, running on some combination of solar power and nuclear battery and sheer obstinate persistence. The signal it sends is not strong. It fades in and out depending on the weather and the topology of the terrain between the transmitter and wherever you are. But when it comes through clearly, it plays the music of a world that ended a long time ago, in voices that have been silent for all those years, warm and clear in the static. That is what the Fallout universe sounds like from the inside. It sounds like something trying to be heard across a very long distance. The games are built on the premise that the past is still transmitting, that the pre-war world, the people who lived in it, the choices they made and the things they loved and the things they feared, are still present in the environment, still legible, for the reader patient enough to find the signal in the noise. The Easter eggs and secrets we have been through tonight are part of that transmission. The Ray Bradbury house in the Capitol Wasteland, the Indiana Jones skeleton southeast of Goodsprings, the vault experiments, each one a parable about power and complicity and the specific ways that institutions harm people, the developer names in the tombstones, the holotapes from people who did not know they were being recorded for posterity, the crashed satellite whose dish still points at a region of the sky. None of these are accidents. All of them are someone saying, "We were here. We noticed this. We thought this was worth preserving. We thought someone would come looking. And you did." That is the relationship the Fallout universe has with its players. At its most fundamental level, the developers hid things. You found them. In the finding, the world becomes more real, more inhabited, more specific, more true to what a world actually is. A place where people live and work and make things and leave behind more than they know for people they will never meet. The wasteland keeps its secrets with patience. It has had 200 years to practice. And the secrets are still there, waiting in the dark of vault corridors and ruined houses and crashed satellites and the margins of terminal entries for anyone who takes the time to look. Sleep well. And when you wake up, maybe go back and check that corner of the map you never quite reached. Something is probably there. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you. Genuinely. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is there. There's something I love about knowing where in the world this reaches. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it means more than you know. See you in the next one. End of script. Addendum. More small things worth knowing. There is a tendency, when compiling lists of Easter eggs and secrets, to gravitate toward the dramatic and the well-documented The Vault experiments that generated the most community discussion. The pop culture references with the clearest paper trail. But the Fallout universe is also full of smaller things, details that are easy to miss, that do not generate controversy or extensive analysis, that simply sit in the game as expressions of careful craftsmanship. These are some of those things. The broken terminals. In Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, there are terminals throughout the wasteland that are broken non-functional, displaying only static or an error message. Players pass these by because there is no interaction to be had. But several of these terminals, if you look at the hardware carefully rather than the screen, have details built into their physical design that tell you something about their history. Scorch marks on the casing. Bullet holes through the screen. Evidence of a specific kind of damage that implies a specific kind of event. A terminal with a bullet hole through the screen was shot. Someone at some point in the last 200 years shot this terminal. Whether it was rage, the terminal giving bad news and its user responding badly, or deliberate sabotage, or a stray shot in a firefight, is left for interpretation. The physical evidence is the only record. The bobbleheads and what they were for. The Vault Boy bobbleheads scattered throughout the Commonwealth in Fallout 4 are collectibles with gameplay effects finding them boosts specific S, P, E, C, I, A, L stats and skills. Most players who engage with them do so purely as collectibles, tracking them down with guides or with the help of the Lucky Charm magazine perk that shows them on the map. What most players do not do is read the text on the bobblehead bases. Each bobblehead has a small motto inscribed on its base, a piece of text, in keeping with the Vault Boy's relentlessly optimistic promotional character. These mottos are not random. They are specific to the stat or skill the bobblehead boosts, and they reflect the pre-war Vault-Tec promotional philosophy with precision. The Charisma bobblehead says, "You'll never be a failure when you can make others feel like a bigger one." The Perception bobblehead, "Only through observation will you perceive the worst in people." The Intelligence bobblehead, "Enhancing your mind is the first step to improving yourself and insulting others." They are, collectively, a portrait of what Vault-Tec actually thought about people. Vaguely contemptuous, fundamentally competitive, optimistic about the individual at the expense of the community. The cheerful Vault Boy mascot is delivering messages about social comparison and competitive self-improvement disguised as encouragement. The mottos are Vault-Tec's actual philosophy, stated plainly. Most players collect the bobbleheads and never read the bases. The Fishing skeleton. In the Commonwealth, on a pier extending into one of the local bodies of water, there is a skeleton. It is sitting in a chair. It has a fishing rod. The fishing line is still in the water. There is no holotape, no note, no associated location marker. Just a person who went fishing before the bombs fell, or sometime in the 2 centuries since, and did not come back. The fishing rod in the dead hands, the line still dangling, the chair positioned to watch the water. These are the details that constitute the whole of the story. Someone was here. Someone liked fishing. Someone came here, probably more than once, probably in the uncomplicated way that people fish before they have reasons not to. The specific detail that makes this skeleton worth stopping for is that it is still holding the rod. In 200 years, or however long ago this person died, the grip has not relaxed enough to drop the fishing rod into the water. Whatever happened to the person in the chair, the last thing they were doing was fishing. The game preserved that. The sunset every evening. Every evening in the capital wasteland, the Mojave, the Commonwealth, and Appalachia, the sun sets. This is not an Easter egg. It is simply a fact of the game's day-night cycle, built into the engine, present in every playthrough. But the sunset in Fallout 3 was calibrated by Bethesda's art team to a specific quality of light. Warm amber and deep red. The kind of atmospheric light that occurs when the air contains enough particulate matter to scatter the short wavelengths and leave only the long ones. In the real world, That kind of atmospheric condition is produced by dust, smoke, or aerosol, the after effects of large fires, volcanic eruptions, or, as in the capital wasteland, nuclear exchange. The sunsets are beautiful because the air is full of fallout. The light is warm because the sky is dirty. This is not explained anywhere in the game. No terminal entry notes it, no NPC comments on it. It is simply true, and it produces sunsets that stop players in the middle of combat, in the middle of traveling, in the middle of everything to stand and look. That is the Fallout universe's final hidden detail. The beauty is real and the reason for the beauty is terrible, and both of those things are true simultaneously, and the game never asks you to resolve that contradiction. It just lets the light be what it is, amber and long in the ruined afternoon, and trusts you to stand in it for a moment before moving on.